Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by my good friend Gene Park of the Washington Post and Punching Up, sometimes on Constellation. Good to see you, Gene. How are you today, my friend?
Good. I'm just coming off the heels of my 43rd birthday. You know?
Congratulations. Happy birthday, belatedly. How did it go?
Good. I don't have like a ton. I posted in our Discord that it's been 10 years since my last real big birthday party. And I think I told you this, but my last big birthday party was when I was 33. And I held it at the Trump Hotel Waikiki.
Yeah, you did tell me. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And they reached out to me and they really wanted to be like, hey, Gene, we really would love to sponsor your birthday, because my birthday was like the biggest. It was like a huge deal, I know
you're such a socialite. I love how much of a socialite you are.
It's I know how much people hate about how much I brag a lot, but like it's true. Like I was a huge like Honolulu socialite, and my parties were like a big deal. You would have to reserve like time with me and like at the party, and so it was great, but it's just been 10 years ago, and it's just so far different. I'm not like that anymore. I'm not a socialite anymore. Over the years, I've realized that being so social really drains me.
Mm-hmm.
I realized
Sure.
It took me years to realize I was actually an introvert. So instead, this year I just hung out at home, and there was Otakon happening here in DC. So Otakon is the big East Coast anime convention, and basically so much of the Final Fantasy Square Enix crew came out to Otakon. They successfully lured out Yoshinori Kitase, who is the director of Final Fantasy 6, 7, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 10, and Naoki Hamaguchi, the Rebirth director, and Teruki Endo, who was the combat director of like Resident Evil 5 and like
Interesting.
Some of the more recent Monster Hunter games before he joined and did the battle for Rebirth. So that was cool, and all the voice cast, So Kitase and Hamaguchi were like, let's invite Gene out to dinner. So
sick.
So I went out to have Spanish tapas with the Final Fantasy leadership. So
do any of them, the Japanese guys, speak English, or do they understand it and won't speak it, or are they like?
They pretty much. I had translators with me, so But the whole dinner was just me and them talking.
That's awesome.
I had two translators by my side, so like it was like with two people by my side, like that felt like a lot more rapid fire. Like the conversation was actually pretty free flowing. So
feel bad for the translators almost, where they have to
they can't talk. Yeah, I mean, like they try to have a conversation with me, and then like Kitase would be like, "What are you guys talking about?"
No, shut up, you.
Yeah. Yeah, like we'd be joking about something and like, what's so funny, guys? Like, okay, well, we got to explain to him now.
It's funny, man. I asked that just because, and I've said this on Sacred in the past, I was always just so tickled by meeting some of the Japanese devs. Inafune is definitely one of these guys that totally understands English, but refuses to speak it, I think because they're embarrassed. Or they don't think they speak English well. So you could often speak to him and he would not need a translator, but then would speak to the translator to speak back to you in some sense.
Yeah.
Or he would like clarify something with the translator. I love that. I think Kojima is the same way.
Probably. Shuhei must know English pretty well though, right? Because you hung out with him pretty often.
He went to UCLA for undergrad stuff.
So he knows English.
The States.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. He that was intimidating. Like when I would go to dinner with him in Tokyo, he would order everything in Japanese, and he's very well respected at these restaurants and all of that. And I'm just like some dork. Struggling.
Yeah, he's like a regular, like oh, Mr. Yoshida-san, that must have been cool, to be in the natural element. So that's why like these guys were in my natural element,
right?
And the Spanish tapas bar restaurant was like a place that I recently took someone out on a date with, So I was like, this is a good date night spot. So and it was super crowded. So, and they asked a lot of questions about DC and about like journalism, and I told him about the prisoner exchange that Biden just did, and how we had our own like prisoner exchange about 9 years ago. And
Interesting.
Kitase was like,
Yeah, you got them a little. It would have been
true
interesting
journalism,
to.
you know.
It would have been. You got them a little late, but it would have been interesting to talk to them about what happened just yesterday from when we were recording with the stock market in Japan, where it lost like 12% or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I just saw that news. So that would have been that would have been an interesting topic that I could have dived into. But
Yeah, I think Square Enix was down like 20 points.
mhm. Yeah,
But I think
maybe they release it because they're like, okay, Gene's done with dinner. We can just release the numbers now. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's dude, I was so annoyed when I was some of these like culture warrior guys that just blame everything on DEI and all these kinds of things. They were circulating these tweets, like this crew of people being like, look at the Japanese stock market and all the video game companies, how they're all down like 10%, 15%, 20%. I'm like, you are so stupid. If you think that this has anything to do with DEI, do you pay attention to the news at all? It's everybody, Oh my God. Oh, so obnoxious. But I'm so jealous. That's so fun. That sounds like a good time. One of the good things about my post IGN career, and especially I guess post Kind of Funny, is I don't schmooze or like talk to anyone anymore, except for like some of my closer friends in the industry, and people that I know better behind the scenes. But part of the shitty part of that is I don't meet anyone anymore, where you'd find yourself at random dinners and random drinks and all these kinds of things, talking to all these different people. So that's great.
Yeah,
man.
yeah. Which is why like this conversation between you and me has always been interesting, because like we are at like like extreme ends of our gaming journalism career. Like you are 10 years removed from it, as you always say, right? And I'm still 4 years deep into it. Like a lot of people forget, but I just started at the very late end of 2019. Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of the first games I covered.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, let's get into it. I mean, this is a good segue, I guess, because I had read your piece on the Washington Post, your day job. You wrote a story entitled "Game Informer Shutdown Ends an Era of Gaming's Glossy Prestige," and I was taken by this just because I know that because your team is truncated to basically you, you have to be selective about what you write about and what you cover, and I guess the real estate that you would take up and all of the rest. And I thought it was kind of powerful that you chose to write about Game Informer, because actually it was a big deal in our circles. It was trending on social media and all of the rest, but it kind of just has already come and gone, which is crazy because it really was this huge institution, and it just goes to show how quickly things are moving in all spheres of life. So that really, I was taken by that. What made you want to write about Game Informer? How does it kind of work behind the scenes? Do you have to pitch these stories to people, or do you just kind of write them and then send them to your
Almost
editor?
all the stories I've written have been pitched. What's funny about this one is that it was just my editors like recommending to me, and I was like, I probably wouldn't have written anything, because this was right when Otakon was starting, and I was going to attend Otakon, and I was going to like meet the Square Enix people. And then my editor was like, "Hey, Game Informer just closed. Like, do you think you might want to write like a retrospective or an appreciation for it?" And I was like, yeah, actually, that's a good idea. So like I was just down with it. So I just ran into the office. Actually, no. What I did was I went to the Square Enix a developer panel, and I said, "Well, this developer panel is happening in 30 minutes, so let me go watch it." And then, like, let me say hi to Kitase-san and Hamaguchi-san real quick. And then I just said hi to them. And then that's when we talked about dinner. And I ran to the newsroom and I wrote the piece in like 45 minutes. And then I went back to Otakon to see the Final Fantasy 16 panel and meet Ben Starr.
Cool.
So yes, it was a really, really fast piece that I wrote. But I was like, this is the end of video game magazines. Obviously we have third party, or not third party, but like smaller independent outfits like Sandy, right? With the retro PlayStation magazine that what's it called again?
PlayStation Retro. I think it's RPM, Retro PlayStation Magazine.
Awesome.
I don't have them on my desk anymore. I have
so
every
simple.
issue.
I love that's so simple, like PSM, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah. Go
so yeah, so there's RPM and Nintendo Force, right?
Yep.
Which is
Lucas Thomas.
Yeah, Lucas Thomas. Right, that's right. You guys were just talking about him on Constellation.
Yeah, I worked with him at IGN many years ago. He was a machine, that kid. Like, because it was Mac Casamassina, it was Fran Mirabella, Mac Casamassina, all those guys, and
wow,
Craig Harris. Like Craig Harris was like the Game Boy guy, and then they, Casamassina, and then there was Bozon later on and all of that. But there were so many games on DS and Wii and WiiWare and all that, and that they would just shoot all the stuff to Lucas Thomas, and this kid's byline was like everywhere. And then eventually he got smart and realized like, oh, I actually don't really probably need to do this. Like I could do my own thing. And so yeah, he founded Nintendo Force, and that's a really cool, really well respected. Apparently, I've never gotten a physical copy of it. I've seen some of the PDFs.
Looks nice,
very high quality.
Yeah, it looks very good. Looks very, very good. You know. So besides those, and then so I looked around. I was like, yeah, obviously Edge is still around, but that's UK, right? That's what do they call it? Imagine Publishing or whatever, or the
right. IGN's original parent.
Yeah.
Imagine Games Network.
Imagine Games Network. Yeah.
When it meant something, because people forget IGN did mean Imagine Games Network, but it meant after 1999, I guess it meant nothing. That was we had stickers that said IGN means nothing. Made at some point, because like people always thought it was like Internet Game Network or something.
Yeah,
I'm like, no, it means nothing. It means literally
international gaming news. That was what I always had in my head, which is like such a fucking corny name, but it's like, oh yeah, IGN. You know,
it's strange, yeah, because people like it's just an acronym that is not active. You know,
that's really funny.
And then you wrote in the, I love that you wrote in the piece. You talked about Famitsu. Obviously, that's an institution still.
Yeah, at Edge magazine too, right?
Right.
And then PC Gamer still publishes and distributes in the US, but they are UK owned too, right? So, it ends a proud tradition of American printing, you know, of video games, you know, Electronic Gaming Monthly, GameVent, GamePro, and of course Game Informer. And I wrote in my piece that other people will eulogize Game Informer more, because obviously there's so many outspoken former Game Informer employees. The podcast MinMax being one of the most foremost, and they just put out a video of a tour that they did in March or April of the new offices, and they even go into this famous, like, much vaunted vault of all the games that they ever got through Game
Informer. I brought that up on the show recently, that they have like a world famous library of video games going all the way back to 1991, which is insane, because all of the sites and magazines should have that, but we pillage the shit out of those. I mean, that's just the reality, is that we would just take games all the time. I think they had like a very strict, you can't fuck around rule, and it allowed them to collect this massive tome of games, which is so sick.
They were in these like bright red lockers, so it's obviously like secured and, you know, like distinctive. This vault, they have all these old game systems. You know, they were messing around like with the N-Gage, which is something I even
side talking. Remember that?
Yeah. They make a reference to Side Talk, which is amazing. I remember when Shaquille O'Neal was trying to like promote that thing or something. I don't know.
Dude, side talking is like one of the first memes I ever remember on the internet, because I don't think it exists anymore, but there was sidetalking.com, and it was just people's pictures of them side talking into random things. So like they would just put whatever up to their face, like sideways, or like that was like in the, you know, what was it? Engage is like 2004 or something. So that was a long time ago. So that's funny.
I just misremember Shaquille O'Neal promoting it, but he was actually talking about tacos. But it's like
that looks like an Engage.
But it looks like an Engage, right? So I was like, oh yeah, of course Shaquille O'Neal was there. But yeah, they were talking about they went through the vault and all their old fucking statues, like the promo statues that they have and everything like that.
It's awesome.
But yeah, it's just again, it ends American printing, you know. But sorry. But again, the reason why Game Informer was being, I say, is eulogized better than other people is because I didn't grow up with Game Informer. And like, I remember you said on Constellation, like, I don't remember Game Informer at all in the early 90s.
Me neither.
And that's exactly the same with me. I think Funko Land probably didn't exist in the East Coast, which is probably why like you didn't hear about it.
No, we had Funko Land, but I don't know when Game Informer became associated with them. Is that, do you know from, I should look into this.
It started in 1981 with Funko Land, you know.
Oh, so they were the progenitor of it from the entire, so GameStop acquired them when they acquired Funko. Yeah. I never even knew that. For some reason, I always just thought Game Informer got wisely, I think, absorbed by GameStop at some point, being like, let's use this as our propaganda arm.
No. It was Funko Land that had the propaganda arm.
Interesting. Yeah, because that's true. You know what? Funko used to have those newspapers. Remember those? Where it would have all the prices of all the games. Yeah. So they were like in the physical that's so interesting, dude. I didn't know that. That's like something I should know, but I didn't know that. So yeah, I honestly think, Gene, that the reason that I didn't come across it was that there were both so many magazines at that time, and at the same time, I was such a loyalist to specific magazine brands that, and I had such a limited amount of money, and I subscribed to these things, that I was like, Game Informer, I don't think was the reason I don't think I was into any of these magazines really was because it was like, it would say on the top of it, NES, SNES, Master System, Genesis, Neo Geo. It's like, I don't give a fuck about any of that stuff. I just want NES, SNES, Game Boy. And so I was into Nintendo Power and then later into PSM and EGM. And I said on Sacred, you might have noted, I really loved EGM too, which is a really obscure magazine that a lot of people probably don't remember. But it was all strategy guide content. And it was so cool. So yeah, I think the agnosticism of Game Informer conflicted with my deep fanboyism as a kid, where it's like, why would I buy a magazine at Borders that is purported to be 70% about stuff I don't even own, you know? So I think it was just one of those things, but I look at the old Game Informer covers with that yellow logo and I'm like, I don't remember even seeing this.
I don't remember that at all. I don't remember the Funko Land iteration of Game.
That's
Game
so interesting
at all. Because I grew up on Guam, right? So the only video game store on Guam was by this Indian dude named Harry Utam, and he had a electronic shop called Utam's, and that was where I bought all my NES games, and eventually like PlayStation games would show up at the mall or whatever. But we had no GameStop or Funko Land or any national chains. Like fuck, when Burger King opened on Guam, it was a huge deal, right? So it wasn't until I moved to California for school in 1999 where I was like, oh my God, stores dedicated to video games? Are you fucking kidding me? That's crazy, you know?
That's
so then I started going to Funko Land, and I think that was when when did Funko Land like merge with
it was the early 2000s, I want to say, right?
Yeah. It happened definitely like while I was in college.
Because EB's all in that shit too. Like that GameStop started vacuuming these things up, and I don't know what order it happened in.
2000,
go ahead.
It happened in 2000. Two of Funko's rivals, EB and Babbage's, engaged in a bidding war for the company's purchase. Funko was acquired by Barnes & Noble in June 2000 and merged with Babbage's to form GameStop in December 2000.
That's right, because GameStop didn't even... It's funny, because GameStop was not a part of my childhood either, but it didn't really exist either. But I was an EB guy. And then there was Software Etc. and a few other things that you can get. And you can go to Toys R Us and KB and all that kind of shit too. The dedicated video game store was kind of ephemeral and short-lived, wasn't it? When you really think about it, it took a while for that to happen, and then by the time it happened, the internet kind of
That's true. Yeah,
everything up.
GameStop barely had a chance. It didn't even have a chance to become like Woolworths or Sears or anything. You know, it didn't become, or even Radio Shack. You know, it barely established itself. It started in 2000, and you know, Xbox 360 came like 7 years later or whatever, and then boom. You know.
Yeah, they had like a very sharp, a sharp climb, because what I was saying on Sacred was this company seems unsavable, right?
Yeah.
It's ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen to this company, but
it's like starting a newspaper in 2000. You know,
it's like well, that's what I always say to people when people would contend that, like, I mean, clearly games journalism, and I think journalism overall, and I think you would agree, is deeply unhealthy right now. But people that would contend otherwise.
Just this morning, Axios just laid off 50 people. You know?
Oh, I didn't even see that. Is Steven Totilo okay? He's over.
Totilo was gone like over a year ago.
Oh no, that's right. He went to do GameFile, right?
GameFile. So he went independent with GameFile, but they did not renew his contract at Axios.
Oh, so I see. Interesting. That's so strange, because I actually think I kind of like Axios. I'm not necessarily into like the bent of some of their stuff, but I do like the bullet point. I don't want to dick around too much kind of approach. As I like my long form content too, but I don't think everything needs to be that. So
I have a lot of good friends that work at Axios. The director of audience was my first boss at the Washington Post. He left us for Axios, and then their editor in chief is a really good friend of mine who also happens to be from Hawaii. So I have a lot of close ties with Axios, and I actually asked Axios, like, "Hey, do you guys want extra for Steven Totilo?" You know, and they're like, "I think we're good." And then I find out like 2 months later that they canned Steven Totilo. I was like, "Oh yeah, I understand why." They said they didn't need to talk to me at all, because
you can carve out a little. And I want to get into it later, like what he's doing. I don't know how successful he's been, but it seems like it's doing fine, doing good. Like you can carve out a little niche for yourself, for industry people, and for just quietly do work. which
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
we
I've
can, we
discovered
can,
with Last Stand. You know.
yeah, we can talk about that later too.
Mm.
And you are obviously at the very forefront of you've been at the forefront of that kind of movement too. So it's been interesting. But
Um,
what was I
yeah, go ahead.
saying? So yeah, oh yeah, so Funko Land. So yeah, so Game Informer. I just never grew up with Game Informer. I didn't know the writers. Everyone in MinMax, I have no idea who they were. You know, I didn't know writers at Game Informer. I didn't have a relationship with people like I did with like EGM, with like a Dan Shu, right? Or even IGN with
Sure.
Matt Casaminas or whatever. But like even these names are fairly rare for me to like remember and pull up. Because I feel like like with Edge magazine doesn't have bylines at all, right? So like I can't even attribute some of my favorite writing to different writers in Edge magazine, which is interesting. Um, so I feel like a lot of the personality based stuff really only came out like once like you and Greg started to really kind of push things forward. And even then, I wasn't really paying attention. Again, I mentioned this before. I had no idea who Colin Moriarty was before you reached out to me. I had to look you up, and I was like, oh, is he like a violent person or a sex offender or anything? you know, I was like, everyone fucking hates this guy. What's wrong with him?
I don't know. I'm still
But I
trying to
didn't
figure
know
out
who
what's
you
wrong.
were. I knew who Greg was only because through force of nature because he's so loud, right?
Right.
But I wasn't really familiar with Greg until Kind of Funny started either. And then Kind of Funny was all about centering folks like you and Greg in there. But yeah, I don't know what old Game Informer was like. It wasn't until GameStop opened in 2000 and you started to notice like all the EBs and Funko Lands just started to kind of homogenize into GameStop. I was like, oh yeah, we're all the same management or whatever, but it's all GameStop, and then the GameStop logo started to infiltrate into the stickers and everything like that, into the used game prices, and then Game Informer, and they were like, oh yeah, here's this magazine. You're a member of GameStop. You get discounts, you get points and everything like that, and you get a free magazine. I was like, yeah, sure, I love magazines. So I was a subscriber to Game Informer in college, which is weird, but but I mean, I was subscribing to the LA Times too. So, this is still in the early 2000s when subscribing to print media was still flying.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
I used to love subscribing to magazines.
mhm.
It's exciting. It was exciting to get one in the mail. You kind of started to gauge when you would get it. So you kind of started looking for it at that time of the month.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
subscribe to the Washingtonian magazine. It's my only like tap into like local happenings, right? Especially like the food scene. Anything I know about like the food scene, I actually trust the writers in the Washingtonian magazine, and I know their names, the food critics. Um, so yeah, it was hard to have a relationship building with games media in the early 2000s, I think, for me. And it really wasn't until like YouTube started happening and Let's Play started happening where I started to kind of tap more back into like gaming news and gaming information. Because even back then, like I still was pretty like tapped out. Like I didn't hear about games coming out until like months later. Um, yeah, interesting times. But yeah, Game Informer was something that it was mostly in my early 20s. But it's just sad to see U.S. print media just go down. They were the last bastion, and they were being supported by being the propaganda arm of the only or the biggest video game retailer out there. And as I said in my piece, that their circulation numbers embarrass most newspapers. 8 million circulation. The circulation of the New York Times is 1 million today. And that's
Yeah.
good.
That's crazy.
You know,
Yeah.
so they were so much bigger than the New York Times or Time Magazine or anything like that. And it was due to that built-in advantage of being distributed through a retailer that was still popular at the time, that was still happening, and that was still kind of the only method of purchasing this radical and exciting form of entertainment, right?
There's something you said so much that's so interesting, because I was just thinking about like how I tried to hang on to magazines longer than I needed to in some sense, in some parts of my life. Specifically, what comes to mind for me is the Hockey News, which is like a famous Canadian magazine. And I was actually in the Hockey News when I was at IGN being interviewed about the history of NHL games, which was really cool. And so they sent me a copy, but when I got the copy, I like subscribed to it. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like, I love hockey. I used to get the Hockey News when I was a kid. So I'm going to do this again. And it would just come and they would just stack up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just be like, I'm never going to read these. And I started putting them aside being like, I'll dig through these one day. And then I'll put one in the bathroom or something. And then like, they just never go anywhere. And I realized there's no reforming my brain worm now about the way I digest things. Now, it hasn't extended to everything. I'm still a book person. Like I like reading books and I like reading physical books, but that's different. There's just something about the magazine that feels, it's like reading a physical newspaper, not a newspaper online, which I read most days. In some sense, I'll click on a bunch of different articles, but sitting down and reading the paper, it's like this is outdated. You know, like, and the magazine feels even worse because it's not daily, it's monthly or it's bi-weekly or whatever it might be. So Game Informer, it's funny because I mean, I'm not saying it to be a dickhead. It's like, I was just never really into it. We would get everything at IGN though, sent to us. Like people would subscribe and they would just come like to IGN. And so you would pull through them. Like they would always be like 1 or 2 copies of Game Informer just floating around or on like a lunch table in the lunchroom or something like that. And that was like my biggest exposure to it. And I knew some of the guys, specifically Tim Turi. I don't know if you remember him, Timturi. He worked at Capcom, I think, or something like that. And then I think he actually works at Sony now. But we became friendly through our shared coverage of Insomniac because he was like a big Resistance fan and I was too. So we used to go down there to write about Resistance, and then we became friendly through that. But other than that, I never really even knew anyone that worked at Game Informer, because the big thing about them, and I went into some of this stuff on Sacred Symbol, so I won't be too redundant, but there's even more to say, is they had such a specific and special access to video games compared to everyone else. And this is they're a print outlet that's very important. So when you would go to PR as an IGN editor and say like, we need this thing like this early because we need time. They're like, we don't care. But when Game Informer needed access to games really early, like they would get their own embargo basically. And they would often have games sometimes weeks before everyone else in a different sort of earlier build in order to be able to get the print magazine ready. And it was kind of one hand washing the other because everyone knew how important that was at the time. So that was the kind of stuff that used to frustrate us. And as I said on Sacred Symbols, and I went into how IGN first and that whole branding and Ryan McCaffrey's charge doing previews and all that.
That was interesting. I really love hearing about that. Yeah,
it all came from competing with Game Informer, which we really looked at as like our last at IGN during my era, like the last problem we had to deal with, because we felt like we had kind of dealt with GameSpot and we had kind of we bought one up, and there was just not a lot of relevant websites that were doing anywhere near our traffic. So we weren't never worried about Kotaku or anything like that. But Game Informer and that cover. So I was always jealous of them, even though I didn't really know them, because I'm like, damn, dude, like for as early as I got The Last of Us, and I got it, 3 weeks early or whatever, they had it like 2 months early, and it's so interesting to think about that.
So like I mentioned in a piece that they had access, like unprecedented access to these game companies, right? But Game Informer did like do their due diligence with the access. They produced these beautiful covers. A lot of the features were very, very informative and detailed and well written too. That's what I really liked about it. So that's, but I think Maddie was mentioning in Constellation, and you too, that you didn't really use the Game Informer site for daily news.
No.
And it's very clear that they just didn't have the manpower to do it. If you saw the Twitter, the last tweet that they put out right before fucking GameStop nuked the Twitter account, after putting it, they put out the staff listing, and it was very few people. It's like 15 people,
I was actually shocked by how few people, considering how much content is one of those magazines. It's not like creating the content that's necessarily difficult to understand. It's just like the frame and time in which that has to happen. It's like creating an annualized sports game. It's like you have 9 months, and like when you make a magazine, it's like you have probably, especially with a staff that small, where there's probably not a lot of crossover, people doing pre-production and all that. You have 3 weeks, like, that seems intense to me.
I'm sure they were relying on a lot of freelancers. Look, so I understand, like, the Washingtonian magazine, which I mentioned, also has that same amount of staff, but they're actually trying to cover a much smaller scope of coverage, which is DC, and that was sustainable for them, and that continues to be sustainable, kind of. I'm sure that they're going through their own woes too. Every single print media is. But yeah, it was notable, and it's because Game Informer stopped becoming a news site and they became more of like a features like destination, right?
Which is cool. And I had noted on that, it was Constellation, not Sacred. You're right. Is that there's a tension when you have a magazine when you're, and I don't mean this to be like defamatory of what Game Informer was really doing, but GameStop looks at it as some sort of propaganda arm,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's necessary to have that one hand washing the other in print and in person.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a website and you're competing with all the other websites, you just look quaint by comparison. That's why we were never really worried about their digital footprint. Even at their height, they were just not able to compete in that way.
Of course not. No,
but there's
they
also
were never that. Yeah.
But there's also a tension, I think, Gene, between with a brand that's really important that it is a magazine. It's actually similar to the Hockey News. Like the Hockey News' online presence is big, but it's like not what people care about. Mm-hmm. They kind of wait for the magazine. It's just kind of a tradition for them. Or you go through it, you put it on the coffee table, whatever. And I think that when you support it with better web, you're almost countervailing that when you support it with better web support and say like, let's really invest in the Game Informer website. And it's like, but Game Informer is not a website. People don't know this. I might not remember this. IGN tried to do a magazine. This was a little before my time.
I remember that.
But there were like 2 issues, I think, of a IGN Nintendo magazine, or an IGN magazine rather. And it's like, you're not a magazine, you're a website. And you just gotta kind of know your lane.
Yeah.
It's surprising to me that they couldn't make it work with such a small staff. Like I don't know. Like, were they really in the red? It seems almost impossible to imagine that, because it doesn't seem to be that expensive of an endeavor to do this anymore with a staff that small. It's just confusing to me.
I mean, print is very expensive. That's the problem. It's just prohibitively expensive to print shit these days. But that lends to the prestige, and you talked about this a little bit about like it matters to go walk into the C-suite and slap a magazine down and say, look at what I got you. I got you on the cover of Game Informer, right? So as a print institution, as the Washington Post, right, I cover a lot of stories. Fucking Imagine Dragons wants a print edition of the story that I did on them, because in the PR and in the C-suite and the CEO world, a lot of these folks are old and they still like to get their newspaper, and they still like the idea of like, oh my God, a company invested in print and ink to plaster it on paper and distribute it and tell people, to drive out and send it to people, right? Like that still matters to people, and that still matters to me as somebody who I understand that prestige and that glory and that nostalgia. I still people will see on my Twitter, but I always still post pictures of my print articles because I when we were quote unquote launcher as a news vertical, like we were just like an online only product, and none of our stories ever made it to print. Like none of like Nathan Grayson's articles. And we hired the first reporter that we hired for the Washington Post, besides me, was Elise Favis, and she was a reporter and editor at Game Informer. Loved her. Loved working with her. One of my favorite stories was her and I working together on the launch of Last of Us Part 2. And we had really, really good coverage. A lot of the coverage about Last of Us Part 2 and the discourse around like Neil Druckmann and everything that came from that coverage too. But what was I saying? Print magazines still matter. I still get requests from PR folks all the time. It's like, can you send me can you send me a print version of it? And it's like you have to ask the company, blah blah blah, and they will send it to you. But they still want it. They still want the newspaper version of my articles. It matters.
And that was like you had said you had noted that was a big problem for us just in competing with them for big stories, like and pretty much really game reveals. And
game reveals, yes.
Yeah, and we had and I think Ryan was really successful in doing it, in creating IGN First and making basically a magazine style month-long
that's so smart
plan.
That's so smart. Yeah, it is. When you said that story, my respect. I have a lot of respect for Ryan already, but if that was Ryan's idea, my respect for him really shot up more. Like that's a very, very smart strategic move, I think, and it's still going on.
I've always loved Ryan too. We brought him on. Greg and I have a big part in, I think, convincing IGN that they needed someone like Ryan, because you might remember IGN in this era or not, but like it seemed like such a huge PlayStation website because we were just doing so much more work. Like
Mhm.
we were just churning, like we were just really into it. And
Mhm.
they just needed a strong Xbox voice. And Ryan was very much that strong Xbox voice that brought
Mhm.
balance to
Mhm.
IGN. But what I was, I worked with a lot of people there and some were clownish, but many were really, really great. And he was really one of those people. I sometimes wonder how he's resisted inevitably getting pulled into other parts of the industry because,
Mhm.
and I think it comes from the love of the game in
Mhm.
some sense because he's very personable. He's very smart, interesting. He's interesting. He knows Xbox like I know PlayStation. I mean,
Mhm.
like I have no idea what the hell he's talking about half the time when he's talking about like deep Xbox shit, back in the day.
Yeah,
So
Ryan
yeah,
McCaffrey is one of those names that I do remember from IGN, and it's still surprising to me that like you that he's still there, right? And you mentioned all the time that he could pull away and probably do his own thing. But I think he loves being part of the institution. I think he loves trying to help IGN. And I relate to that. A lot of people are always asking me, "Gee, why don't you just do your own thing to separate from the Washington Post?" And it's like I love the Washington Post. They took care of me. I enjoy working in the institution, and I need a boss. People always wonder like why won't Yahtzee leave second win? And I was like, I think the guy just needs a boss. I think he needs some kind of structure, and he just operates the best in that kind of environment. He needs to be told what to do.
yeah, it's interesting because I wanted to talk about them in a little bit too.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know if you saw like one of them, and I don't know if I guess I should say this is not substantiated, but I had seen that one of the, I guess, I don't know if it was one of the people that left or whatever leaked at some point, like everyone's salaries. Did you see this?
I did see that. I was following it on a Reddit, but apparently he plastered all the salaries onto Discord as he was on his way out. This was Sebastian Ruiz, and he was the guy who resigned and like had that scathing like criticism
Right.
of Nick Calandra, our friend, a friend of the show, Nick
Yeah,
Calandra.
I like Nick. I think he's made some huge optical PR mistakes.
Of course, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I'm generally critical of any co-op just because I don't think it works. But
Mhm.
9 out of 10 times it's not going to work.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
heard that he just plastered all the salaries, and then like I think Jack, their HR guy, was like, yeah, these are accurate, but these are old, and it's been adjusted or whatever. But
Well,
that's what I heard.
and it's like, okay, that's cool. I bring that up only because when I saw Yahtzee, what he was making, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, do you realize how much money you can make? Like doing this, you are like
Okay.
I can't believe you are not making.
So I didn't see the salary numbers.
Oh,
It's
it's like
okay,
in the
cool.
mid 150s or something, 140, something like that. And I'm like, you are the beating heart, dude.
Annually.
Yeah. And well, I assume so. They were just names and numbers. So I can't substantiate
Yeah,
what I saw,
yeah.
but I think that's what it was, something like that. And I was like, that's a lot of money to normal people. And that's a
It's
lot of money
good.
to
Yeah,
normal. Yeah,
it's a
it's
good
great,
salary,
but
right?
not for like,
Not
that's
for
way
someone
more
who's
than I
making.
made at IGN, for instance, but that's not for him,
Mhm. He's making more
I
than
was
me.
surprised by that. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I almost want to be like, are you so lazy? Like, go, but at the same time, it's good for them to have like some sort of central nucleus that all of their other content, because it's cool to discover other content through the stuff that you come in and love. I think that
Mhm.
Sacred has done that for a lot of our content, but that other
Of
content
course,
has
yeah.
also done that for Sacred. That's why I think, defining, like, people come and listen to Define Nuke and find Sacred Symbols, which to me is so funny, but
Hmm.
that's fucking awesome. So
Hmm.
having that, so I understand being in that environment, but I was just surprised by comparably how little it seemed he made. I was like, damn, dude,
Hmm.
you must be just be comfortable riding, because
Hmm.
if you had an agent or something like that, they would be like,
Hmm. Yeah. That if that's the amount, and I imagine that they probably adjusted it to be more by now, right? But still, it's more than what I make even today. At the same time, Yahtzee is so much bigger than either of us. So
oh,
it's
I
like
mean, yeah, he's huge.
Jesus,
That's what I'm saying. Like, he's a force.
Yeah.
It's surprising how I just get bummed seeing people what I would consider vastly underpaid, in the
Mm,
same way I feel about athletes, when it's like you have your window. It doesn't mean
mm,
you can't do well. It doesn't mean that in Yahtzee's case, he'll do this for another 20 years, make lots of money as he already has. But I
mm,
just look at that every year spent as time spent, where it's like you'll
mm,
never get that opportunity to have extracted more out of it. That's why
mm,
I've said in the past that when IGN offered me a big raise when I left to Found Kind of Funny,
mm,
I I I turned it down, obviously, but the longer I thought about it, the more I got upset about it, because I was
mm.
like, you could have just done this for me the whole time. and you chose
Mm.
not to, and I'll never get that time of earning back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's where that comes from. I
Yeah,
guess.
that's what's one thing that people need to learn about corporations is that they actually like budget you at the maximum that they think they will pay you, but they will pay you at the least amount that they will pay you. You know,
Definitely.
and then all the raises are eventually getting to that maximum that they'll allow to budget. You know, which is so fucking frustrating. You know, like I started at the Washington Post $70,000, but I knew I could have been probably making 90,000 right away. You know, but I was new and I was eager. You know, and it was my first year, so
Right. I totally understand. Like when I've said this many times, like when the Fox recruiter, when Fox owned IGN, when I started there, and they were like, all right, so I got my job, and they were talking to me, and they were like, so $40,000, and like before they even got it out of there, I was like, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
yeah, whatever, okay, I have a job at IGN, I'm an editor at IGN, okay, oh, yeah, whatever. And then like looking back at that, I'm like, and I know other people that got hired at the same time, and they're like, dude, I got paid this, or I asked for this, or whatever. I'm like, oh, I'm such a fucking stupid asshole.
we're so fucking stupid, right?
Yeah.
Like we probably could have negotiated for more, and then that's why, like, you know, there's a lot in that in the feminist movement about like, oh, you should be negotiating your payment more, and so like I pay attention to that because they have good strategies there, right? Yeah, that's very frustrating. But that eagerness really gets you, you know. One of my favorite interviews that you ever did was with Philip Mewson. Because I just find that man so fascinating.
Yeah, he is interesting.
Like, he's just such an interesting character. But the way he talked about you guys and the way he felt so nervous about being at IGN was incredible. I was like, this guy is acting like he is around like Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein.
Right, exactly.
And I only thought that because it was interesting because my literal first day at work at the Washington Post was I met Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein on my first day. And then but even I don't even talk about them that way, the way Philip Mewson was talking about like guys like you and Ryan McCaffrey and everything like that. So it's really interesting how people look at IGN and be like, oh my God, this is like the New York Times. And I say IGN is like the New York Times of video game journalism, you know? It's just the biggest, and it's just out there, and it's just kind of like default, right? So then I started to I start to appreciate like that kind of perspective. Like, oh my God, imagine what it must have been like in IGN. Because I never wanted to work in games media, you know. I never thought I would ever do it, you know. I just didn't think it was realistic. I just didn't think that there was enough space for me, you know. I wanted to work, you know, and as I always keep saying, I want to be a music journalist. I want to work in Rolling Stone magazine, which is another magazine that's completely failing, you know. I don't know where to go with this, but
I mean, there's a bunch of different tethers to pull at.
We could still go to so many different avenues here too, but
yeah, like the reality of like, it's funny we're talking about Philip Mewson just because I was thinking about him, I was reflecting on him as you were talking, and this is going to sound really harsh because I don't know him personally, and the couple of times I've spoken to him, he's been very nice and seems.
You were
decent.
Pretty harsh with him in the interview too. So,
I think that was one of the harshest interviews I probably ever gave, just because it was especially awkward at the end where he kind of had asked, was it on the air or no? I think it was on the air, where it's like, do you think there's a way back in for me or something like that? You know? And it's like, and I'm like, no.
You guys recorded it, and you just said it straight up, no, I don't think so.
I don't think so. Like, the thing about him,
right.
and this is what I was going to say. I was going to say it was going to sound harsh, but it's true. Is like Philip, talking to him, what I realized about him is like you had all the tools plus the requisite luck and timing, except for one key tool, which was integrity. And it's crazy that I'll never get over the story just from the point of view of him plagiarizing reviews. That to me is so peculiar, and it's not spoken about enough. People plagiarize academic works. People plagiarize novels. People plagiarize, like, you don't plagiarize criticism.
You plagiarize
because it's so deeply personal.
You know? Ideas, you know, other people's ideas. You know, like. And
that was the biggest thing to me. It's like he wasn't caught. He didn't like plagiarize. He didn't write this huge 50,000 word history like the ones I used to write, and then like found out that like he didn't cite things or didn't and plagiarize there, which is bad, but makes a lot more sense. You know, than being like, I plagiarized a review of Dead Cells. It's like, dude, a review is just your thoughts on it. You know, that's all it is. It's the easiest thing in the world. You know,
I mean, I think he was talking about plagiarizing like the Doom Nintendo Switch review, and I was like, dude, just fucking, it's just Doom Nintendo Switch, man.
Like it seems so like that was the thing to me is like no because
Because
I
he was
could
a
directly
Nintendo guy, right? Yeah.
well I could also just directly relate to the grind of doing reviews and it's a crunch and it's a
Yeah.
lot of work. But
Yeah.
the writing of the review was the easiest part. It was getting
Mm-hmm.
through the game and then having some like cogent series of thoughts
Mm-hmm.
that you wanted to get out. But
Mm-hmm.
writing it is like, and I'm just like, I couldn't, it's more, what you did is more work than the actual work would have required of you. That was what was so
Yeah.
weird. Plagiarizing an academic work, whether
Mm-hmm.
accidentally, which often happens, or
Mm-hmm.
intentionally, which happens less often,
Mm-hmm.
makes just a lot more sense. So that was, he's an enigma in my sense, like,
I
because
s-
he had it all except for that key piece, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, he was a good video editor, right? And that's why he was hired, you know, because he could present well, and I think you were talking about that. Like that was kind of an age where, you know, you were trying to hire from YouTubers, and he had that insecurity the syndrome the whole time, where he's like, oh my god, I'm just a YouTuber among these amazing journalists or whatever, and he was like, oh, I have to beat Doom 2016 on the Switch so they'll respect me, and like I was like, dude, like all of this, like they're not going to give a shit. Nobody's going to give a shit, you know, just fucking write the review. Like it's not a big deal, you know.
No,
This isn't some big investigative piece or whatever. You just does the switch port run good, you know?
it would have been it would have been less of a controversy if he just didn't beat Doom on Switch and then wrote the review.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, no one would have known because there's no achievement system or anything. No one's going to know.
Yeah,
And then
nobody would care.
I'm not trying to encourage anyone to lie or obfuscate.
Yeah.
I've known people. I worked with someone at IGN specifically, and there was someone at GameSpot when I had first started that both got fired for lying about games that they were played when they were reviewing it. It is serious,
Oh my god.
but it's not. There's something like I don't know, like I don't know. There's just something infamous about that to me.
Yeah, you don't need to finish Doom on the Switch to write a review about it, man. You know, like why didn't you think about that earlier? There's already a review of Doom. You know, you can link to that. Just tell us how the Switch port runs.
That's exactly that's what we would have done, dude.
The pressure that he put on himself was insane, you know, and it was coming from nowhere other than in his own mind, you know.
Right.
So
well,
it
that's
was like integrity and like this weird like form of insanity that he had, you know.
That's a key point, Gene, in the sense that that's why I think I related to wanting to tell his story so much is because like I was exactly where I know exactly what you're doing because I reviewed video games at IGN and it's the same thing. It's like, I damn well know no one was putting that pressure on you. Knowing those guys, like no one was paying attention to a goddamn thing you were doing. No one has any idea what's going on there. It's not a bad thing. It's like,
yeah,
you have your own shit to worry about, you know, like no one gives a fuck what you're doing, you know?
Yeah.
That's the funniest part. I know that because I worked there, you know?
Yeah. It's even like that at the Washington Post where like I'm doing everything. I'm just like, oh my god, the editor in chief is gonna read my shit or whatever like that. Like, no, it's like she got you know, they got their own shit going on. You know, if they read it, that's great. You know, and they did read the stuff and they'll tell me and it'll be very encouraging. But there was never any pressure to like, no, Gene has to perform or whatever like that. No, it's just not like that in the journalism world. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, he blew it, man. Like that's a pain. I imagine that's a very painful thing to deal with. Yeah, and that's why I have a little bit of sympathy for him. You know.
Yeah, I have sympathy for him too. But yeah, he has no place in the industry. But like, it's that kind of like wonderment that I'm fascinated by within the games journalism space. You know, like even when I was watching the MinMax tour of Game Informer, like the way they talked about like the history of Game Informer and like this legacy and everything like that was like so wistful and everything like that. And like I appreciate it, and I'm not making fun of it. I'm not calling it cringe or anything like that. It's just hard for me to relate to because I just don't have that strong attachment to games media in the way that I would for like a story newsroom like the Washington Post or even like the Honolulu newspapers. You know, the Honolulu Star Advertiser, which was my old paper, is actually a merged paper of the Star Bulletin and the Honolulu Advertiser, which is owned by Gannett, and we can talk about Gannett. But the Honolulu Star Advertiser today, my old newsroom, doesn't have a newsroom anymore. They all work out of home. You know, they couldn't afford to rent, and they're just out at home. There's one office that deals with HR and circulation, and that's it. It's sales. You know.
How do you feel about that as a journalist? Do you think that can work?
As you know, no, I don't think so. After 22 years, I think I've said this for a long, long time, and I used to warn journalists in conferences like 7 years ago. I said we've already lost Gen Z. Everyone keeps talking about the millennials and what the millennial reading habits, right? And I was like, you people don't understand that is like 8 years, 8 to 10 years behind the conversation already, and we've already lost Gen Z. It's Gen Alpha we need to worry about, but you're still worried about the habits of Gen Z when they're already formed. We fucking lost 2 generations already these last 2 decades. What the fuck have we been doing, right? So some of that frustration kind of leaks out in my piece where I talk about the GameStop CEO being sued by Bed Bath and Beyond for insider trading and everything like that.
Right.
And it's like I feel like media is always trying to like blame and I've been part of this too, where we're always trying to blame external issues like, oh my god, Craigslist like decimated the classified ads, and then all the advertising is going to Facebook and Google, which is still happening, right? And Google was recently declared a monopoly or whatever, but that's a whole other story. But we're like, oh my god, all of digital advertising and going to all these social media sites. But it's like, honestly, it was the media executives that dropped the ball like 20, 30 years ago. It was the stupidity and the ego and the sheer ego and the confidence, the unearned confidence that the media industry had in terms of like, oh, everybody needs news. We're the fourth estate,
Right. Right.
We're an institution, not realizing that people are over institutions, and some institutions will thrive. I don't believe that the Washington Post is going to close anytime in the next century or so, even, right? But the Honolulu Star Advertiser, that's a different story. Even the Los Angeles Times, that's a whole different story. And then my buddy at the who used to work at LA Times, he made this point. I'm actually stealing this point from him, where he was like, "Yeah, we keep blaming all these external factors, but it's our idiot owner at the LA Times that's fucking sinking us. He has all these stupid ideas. He has billions of dollars, and he doesn't know how to use them.
Yeah, there's no excuse, in my opinion, to not have a strong masthead driven newspaper in every major American city.
Exactly.
That should be able to thrive both in print, I guess, but certainly digitally. And certainly that's what I was saying before, is that I think that the Washington Post, even the New York Times, which I know is doing pretty well comparably, and then the Wall Street Journal and all these other things, they still were at an inherent disadvantage as brands by simply not being in the internet silo. So I like a website that was really interesting to watch kind of the rise of, and now it seems irrelevant, but it was huge for a long time, was Huffington Post. and like that website was gigantic 15 years ago.
It started the whole digital startup like wave that eventually led into BuzzFeed, right?
Right, exactly.
And Gawker and all this shit, right? And Kotaku. Like Kotaku is a children of Huffington Post, right?
Definitely, dude. Oh yeah, all of the early like Gizmodo and Jalopnik and IO9 and all that whole family. And I always bring this up too. Like, I don't think they get their credit, although I'm not a fan of some of the people that worked there. Where was One Up was another in the game space, was another really strange upstart. They like poached a bunch of people from IGN and GameSpot to get off the ground. There's a lot of interesting stories to be told there, and then IGN ended up buying them and killing them basically.
Yeah, what do you think about Huffington Post, though? Yeah.
Well, what's interesting about the Huffington Post to me was just that was a perfect place, perfect time, well executed digital newspaper when people were using the internet on a browser. I think even the jump to apps really messed things up because it became so much more mono-focused on using an app. You use the AP app, you use whatever the app, while having tabs or different windows open, I think really benefited a lot of these different websites. I also think low key, because I remember my roommate Doug showing me this when I was in college, and which was RSS. And the entire idea of like putting websites in this thing that then just feeds you new updates on them, but you're still on a browser and can have all these things open. I just believe that when people started getting more off their computers, now they're still on their computers very much, but when they started using apps and phones and all of that, it was now about social media. And so I think that period of time, like the period of print is hundreds of years, and the period of TV is shorter, and the period of this website stuff was even shorter, I think. So
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
don't think in other words, I don't know that anyone can really make a website anymore that is viable in and of itself. It's almost safer to be on someone else's platform, which is what I was saying about game trailers when I was talking to Brad about it. Game trailers famously was very early to the game of video game video online during the rise of high-speed internet, but they refused to use YouTube because it was nonsensical. And I understand that in their mind. They're like, why would we give them 30% of our money? We have our own platform. We sell our own ads and all that. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Websites are not going to be relevant. Going on the YouTube app is going to be relevant. If you made that one different choice, chose that different path, be a different story today. You know, so I think people were making decisions in the place and time. That explains a lot of the fall of all of the Gawker sites and all of the rest. Like it's just not going to really work anymore because now it's about Patreon and Substack and podcasts and YouTube and fucking Rumble and all these different things where people just
Kick.
go and and Kick and all these different places that we've been talking about.
Yeah,
it's about platforms now.
Yeah. The Huffington Post. So I don't know if you noticed, but I actually have history with Huffington Post. I worked with them for a month actually. I launched Huffington Post in Hawaii.
Oh, interesting.
And that was that was a partnership with Pierre Midyar and Ariana Huffington. And Ariana Huffington actually visited Hawaii, and I got to fly around in Pierre's private jet. It was the same private jet that Bill Clinton used to fucking fly to Epstein Island. But well, actually, no, I don't know that for sure. But Bill Clinton has definitely borrowed that plane before. But I got to ride on it.
That's awesome.
Around Ariana Huffington. Terrible person, awful person. Ugh.
I always got that vibe, but I don't know anyone that knows her.
Yeah. She's exactly what you would expect. Just someone who doesn't treat people well and expects everything to be done for her and everything. But Huffington Post was a response, and it was a very smart response to the Drudge Report, right? Which is still a famous website, but that was like just the biggest political website out there.
Dude, Drudge is so different now though, because at some point in the last few years, they just took a turn to being like anti-Trump.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, I don't notice that. The Matt Drudge era of Drudge Report is iconic though, you know?
Yeah. Matt Drudge is an icon. Yeah, absolutely.
Dude, I love Matt. Like the whole rise of Matt Drudge and how much money he made just keeping the website the exact same. People should go, if you're not familiar with the Drudge Report, first of all, I encourage you to just go look at it. And then I encourage you to read like the Wikipedia or just like go read about it, how interesting it is. It was the website that broke the Clinton Lewinsky story.
That's right.
Right. No one would touch this story. And it was in the late 90s. So think about how unheard of that is to have like a video, like to have a video game, but to have a website that's like breaking this iconic news story. It began that whole rise, and it was run by one person out of like an apartment in Washington, D.C. And it's basically just a news aggregate, but he made like millions and millions of dollars a month. It was crazy. You know,
he did. Fascinating guy, very smart guy. One of my heroes. Someone that I really looked up to. And he broke the internet. Literally, he broke through. You know, revolutionary stuff. And that was why he was part of the reason why a lot of newspapers were like, "Oh fuck, we're fucking idiots." You know, we could have just been doing this whole time. You know, we could have just been publishing online fast like that. It's just so stupid. You know. Even the Washington Post, they didn't start a website until like 1999 or whatever, and the website operations was completely separate from the newspaper. So it was literally across the river, you know. So like it was like two different companies that didn't even speak to each other, which is so stupid, you know.
Yeah.
So like I was just about to say like a slur, but it's just so stupid, you know. Like that's how strongly I feel about it. Like I feel like a lot of these CEOs, you were talking about game trailers, right? Game trailers made the really stupid decision of like, no, we have our, and Brad was mentioning about this. No, we have our video player though, you know, our video player, you know, what the fuck is a video player? You know, like, oh, because so-and-so company bamboozled our CEO, you know, like fucking Bungie Pete Parsons being like, no, you know, this is a really great deal. You want to buy into our company and our video player, and the ad rates are so good. And then companies just get stuck into that. You know, I speak from experience. You know, I worked in newspapers. We're like, no, but our video player, though, you know, we spent $1 million on this video player, so we better fucking use it.
Right.
You know, And then
Totally.
so it's like, okay, so we just lost like $1 million, and then so we're gonna keep losing millions of dollars more because of this stupid fucking like tactic that you decided to really like own in on, you know. But there are managers out there, but like, no, but this will save the company though. I'm so smart, you know. I'm contributing to the company. It's a little bit like Hollywood producers coming in and be like, oh, look, I have this idea, and why don't I just tank the whole production because you know I want to feel like part of the solution, even though you're not, you know. But
Totally. I totally relate to what you're saying about the video player because we had a very similar thing at IGN for years.
IGN too, yeah, I'm sure.
And our video player was notoriously bad. And we used to get in in trouble or get in even arguments with people where we would write a story and there would be a trailer and we would embed like the YouTube version of it. And they'd be like, you got to embed the IGN version of it. So like when it gets clicked on, and I totally get it. Like the ad packages are much more valuable. But I remember asking this question where they had said to me in a meeting where they were like, well, it's like we make 3 or 4 times more on a video click on IGN. And I'm like, cool. So I totally get that. But what if you had such a reliable video product running on the best video player in the world, which is YouTube, that you would do maybe 3 or 4 times more traffic, you know, and then you would just make it up by being on the platform that matters. It's like you need to be where it matters. And notoriously, IGN made a huge mistake with do you remember IGN First? Or I'm sorry, not IGN First. It was the IGN YouTube channel. I can't remember the name of it now, where they named it something else. And then we learned late. So we start. I wish I remember what it was, but I can't remember anyway. But there's this. We got like a bunch of money from YouTube to make an IGN presence on YouTube, and instead of making it on the IGN channel, we made a separate channel. That's where Up at Noon lived, which was Greg's show, which was a great show, and a few other things. That's where Naomi Kyle's content lived and all of that. When really it was all about being kind of together into this one place, but we didn't realize even then that that's what we should have done, and that led to the failure of this other place where it's even asking people on a platform to go to another channel is now becoming too much. You want to send them to one place. So yeah,
IGN Games. It's just called IGN Games, which always confused the fuck out of me, you know. And I didn't know which channel to follow, you know. It's kind of like Kind of Funny Games, you know. Like I want to be like I am a fan of Kind of Funny content, and I'm glad that they kind of narrow shit down. But like they had different channels, and I was like, what the fuck is going on, you know? But yeah, it looks like Up at Noon was on IGN Games.
IGN Games, I guess that's what that must have been what it's called. I don't know why.
615,000 subscribers.
Yeah, exactly. Like we realized it's like, oh, we shouldn't have. So I guess what I'm saying is like it used to be about websites, right? And then the experience on the website, and then it became about experience on platforms, and then it became about not asking too much of an audience on a platform. So they already subscribed to IGN. So now you're asking them and hoping and praying that they subscribe to this other IGN channel. And you're only getting some of them. And really, they're already where they're going to be. And that's about as much as you can expect out of them. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, that's not the audience's fault. That's just the way things are absorbed now. I don't sit around and watch fucking network TV, you know? So I'm not going to judge people that do, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And so I'm not, but I also don't read websites anymore, really, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a complicated situation out there. I think people just have to kind of do the best that they can do in their specific silos. And I think the Washington Post is one of those brands that has the advantage of having a very renowned name and a good reputation. You know?
Yeah. It's kind of like what you say. Like IGN has that legacy already like imprinted. You know, especially in old internet, right? All the old URLs and everything. That's just going to live forever. And I think that, you know, the Washington Post at least has that mind power. You know, like everyone in Congress still reads the Washington Post, and that was kind of like our issue. Is that like, oh my god, like everyone in Congress, we are the paper of the most powerful people in the world, and then we forget to cater to literally everyone else. So
what do you I want to look this up real quick. What do you make of Famitsu's continued relevance in Japan? It still has circulation is still 500,000. That's pretty substantial. That's like 0.5% of the popopulation.
I don't want to yeah, I know.
It's like
I don't want to speak too
so
broadly on Japanese culture, but because it's been some time since I really like tapped into Japanese culture. But from what I understand is that, and we can see this in the physical game space too, right? That Japanese still value the value of physical media, you know. So Japanese folks generally, at least in the early 2000s and the early 2010s, from the trends that I was viewing back then, because I was really interested in Japanese media, right? Not just Famitsu, but the Asahi Shimbun, and I was wondering how are Japanese newspapers doing there? They were doing really well. Lots of circulation, and that's because Japanese people still like to sit down and they just like to sit down and just read a print product, you know. So I think it's just culturally, the physical media is still fairly strong there. So they're still going. I was actually talking to Kitase and Hamaguchi. I was like, "Oh, how are the Asahi Shimbun doing?" It's like, I should work there. He's like, "Yeah, you should just move to Japan." So I was like, "I should." I was like, "What the fuck am I doing here? I'm Asian. What am I doing here?"
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, sure.
I should be in Asia. You know, I
Sure.
should go back. I should go back home. You know, go back to where I came from.
Get out of here.
Get out of here.
No, we don't want you to leave. We can't have you leave. That would be so
But
fun though to get a
so
little
that's
time in
why
Japan.
I think that's why I wasn't that surprised that Famitsu is still around, and you know, like that's why like UK print media, you know, UK that's still a culture that kind of sits down and reads newspaper every once in a while, just not as much. It's just the United States that just like no, we need to use app though. You know?
Use the
I have
app.
to see it on my tweets. You know, if I need to see the headline.
Scan
I
the
don't
QR
know.
code. My least favorite thing in the world.
QR code. So I don't know. I don't want to pretend that I know how to save the media industry. I've been trying to. I've made a lot of made a lot of my own bad calls. You know, I part of the reason why I don't use Facebook anymore is because I feel betrayed by Facebook. You know, I was really. I got hired at the Washington Post because I had an excellent Facebook strategy. You know, I was able to wield Facebook in a way that blew up traffic for websites. So like the Huffington Post Hawaii, like they were like, oh my god, Gene like really established a presence there. Silverbeat, which is the investigative startup, I increased traffic by 564%, and that was all through things that I was doing on Facebook, not even Twitter. You know, people know that I'm really good at Twitter, but I was really a master of Facebook. And then Facebook eventually came out and said like, oh, we don't care about media anymore, and oh, all those video views were lies. You know,
yeah, that was crazy. Created a lot of problems.
So I was like, what the fuck have I been doing then? You know, I feel like I've been wasting my time, and Facebook was lying to me this whole time. So I just don't engage with the product anymore. I barely use Instagram. I don't use Facebook personally. You know, I just post on Instagram and that goes to Facebook, and I don't think about Facebook as a place of strategy anymore either. You know, I don't know what that place looks like anymore. I understand that there's a lot of AI memes there. But whatever Facebook is today, I don't really understand it anymore, and that's by design. I don't care.
Yeah, I'm not into the platform either at all. Yeah. The only time I ever hear about Facebook now is when I watch the Predator Catcher videos, because those guys, they're always catching those dudes on Facebook.
It's always on Facebook, yeah.
So. But I don't. I used Facebook for a long time. Northeastern was one of the first schools on it 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. But I haven't really had any like use for it in probably 15 years at this point. Like it's just, for me, it's just not. Twitter really became, as I described it recently, like kind of just the stream of consciousness sort of feed of what is going on in the world, kind of catered to you, although a little manipulative as well, and certainly imperfect. But it made everything else seem obsolete after I got into it, where I was just like, I don't know, Facebook to me, it just doesn't do it for me. But that whole controversy around the views and how that trickled down to ad revenue and people's interpretations of their own businesses and how a lot of them ended up being kind of phantoms is like very weird and forgotten about. I hadn't thought about that in a long time, actually. I'm sorry that touched you so deeply.
You know, but yeah, you know, I was really huge into social media, and I was really worried about like what newspapers and the media was doing. So that's why I was, you know, I'm famously like the first journalist on Twitter in Hawaii, you know. But I maybe like the first one to like sign up for the platform, but I was certainly the first one to actually use it as a news distribution tool. You know, that's why I really got my start there. And they were like, "Oh my god, like Gene's at the murder scene, go follow him," or he's at the crash site, so he knows when like the freeway is going to open up, so go follow him or whatever. Or oh my god, there's a fucking tsunami coming. Gene's at the beach right now, you know. And then, so that's when like the New York Times like started following me. They're like, oh, like they have a reporter on the beach like during a tsunami alert. That's fucking crazy. Let's follow him, you know. And that's kind of like how I got started. So I wasn't able to produce. Well, I produced success for Silverbeat, right? But I wasn't able to produce success for my newspaper, the Honolulu Star Advertiser, because they were so slow in so much of the social media stuff, you know. And you know, they were one of those people who had a video player, you know, and they had this stupid idea of like having these video news reports in like grocery stores or whatever like that. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing, man? You know. So I had to leave. I was like, this is not a company that it respects my ideas. But not only that, would respect any good idea, you know. So I just have to leave because this is just not a place of growth for me, you know. So that's why it was really encouraging when I worked at the Washington Post, and they're like, "Oh, Gene, your ideas are fucking fantastic. Let's do this," you know. And even when I worked at Syllabi, they're like, "Oh yeah, you know, Gene, you have complete controls of what we do on social media." And it was a huge success, and that's the reason why I got hired at the Washington Post. So I wasn't able to bring success to my companies, maybe, or not every company, but I was able to carve out a niche for myself, right? And that's kind of like what a lot of some people are doing, like you mentioned earlier, Steven Totillo seems to be doing pretty well with newsletter. And what the nice thing about Steven is that he still has like a lot of context, right? And so he's still able to like break news, and you know, he's still a good editor, and he's able to find interesting angles that people are interested in.
Yeah, I'm not. I try to. I think I'm decent at this too, especially considering how much heat I get from so many people. But I'm pretty good at detaching how I feel about a person personally from the quality of their work and the importance of what they've done or whatever. I did not like Steven Totillo's reign of Kotaku. I think that website was unwieldy and strange in a lot of different ways. But and we've had weird interactions, he and I, in the past as well. But he's obviously one of the great working journalists, proper journalists in the games industry. I mean, that's easy enough to acknowledge. Yeah. So as far as, I guess, where things are going, because I'd love that you brought up in your piece, and I'm looking at it here, that you had brought up MinMax. MinMax, of course, is a competitor of ours, I guess, but I don't really give a shit about any of that. I think people are kind of, I want to win, but people I think are kind of confused about how I feel about competition, which is like, especially on Patreon, where it's like, I want all of these things on Patreon to do really well, you know, because it just gets people comfortable with the platform. And as we were saying, it's very platform centric. And as people become more comfortable with the platform, they bleed into these other things. It's just, as I understand, objectively through data, good for all of us to do well over there. So I'm pulling from MinMax and all the others to do well and pull more people into this platform. But a lot of those guys come from Game Informer, and they've successfully jumped. Now, I don't know what their situation is as far as who's part-time and who's full-time and all of that, and who gets paid what and all of the rest. But I think that they are a good prototype of, or an archetype of, what could be for some of these other places should they go down. Video Games Chronicle recently got on to Patreon, which I think is cool and interesting and smart.
Digital Foundry is on Patreon too.
Right, exactly. And it's just good.
They're owned by Eurogamer, but it's interesting that they're also on Patreon. You know,
right now IGN owns that whole family, right? Or at least
that's true.
Yeah, which is interesting
about that. Yeah.
So what do you think about this growing ecosystem, and how do you think different entities in it, as you see, are doing? You know, we brought up Second Wind earlier. You have Kind of Funny. You have No Clip, MinMax. There's a bunch of them, really. I mean,
yeah.
So who do you think's doing good, and what do you think about the scene? Could it grow? Is this the way it's going to be now for a little while? Is this the permanent future? I feel like it's not, but I feel like it is the very much the present. Like, I don't think it's going away right now, but I think that it's not going to be like this forever.
I agree I agree with you completely. That I don't think this is it'd be hubris to say that this is a permanent future. But it is definitely done now, and it is a future that I know that we've talked about how much you don't like Taylor Lorenz, but it is a future that Taylor Lorenz and I have both like predicted, where we were both warning, and Taylor much more loudly because she gets interviewed a lot, about the personality base of journalism. You know, you think about why people are subscribing to all of these places. People are subscribing to Second Wind because of Yahtzee. They love Yahtzee. People are subscribing to MinMax because they really love the Game Informer podcast, right? And they really love the energy that Ben Hansen is able to do. And Ben Hansen's really, really. I like MinMax quite a bit. I don't watch all of their shows. And I've tried to watch some of their deep dive podcasts where they do like spoiler mode podcasts, and I walk away a little bit disappointed. Not so much because like I think they're bad conversations, but I expect something called deep dive to dive a little deeper. And I would like I would like personalities or people on the podcast that like really, really know the games well, right? Like for example, the Elden Ring deep dives. It's like these are people that like kind of play FromSoft games, but like these aren't people that are like live and breathe them, right? And like they would have one person that does that, but that kind of like falters the conversation. It's kind of, maybe a lot of people might think that about our own spoiler cast too, but who knows? But Ben Hansen does do like a lot of cool like story ideas. Like he has this cool feature where like developers versus developer, where two developers will be talking to each other. So it's very much like kind of like what Variety does, like with the Hollywood actors and producers and everything like that. So I think MinMax really does, like, they have really good energy there. But people are subscribing for the energy. They like the way Ben conducts himself. They like the way I think a lot of it is due to Ben Hansen. Easy Allies, obviously, right? Was very personality driven. And a lot of people are talking about how that's kind of falling off because a lot of the great personalities have left, Of course, Kyle and Ben and our very own Brad as well. And that's kind of falling by the wayside. Kind of, you and Greg nailed it completely perfectly in 2014 to seeing that coming and believing in yourselves and believing in your own worth to kind of break off. So that's why, like, I've been trying to, like, and at the Washington Post, like, I've been trying to like make that case. It's like I think we need to be finding the interesting personalities within our organization, and we need to be putting them out in the forefront. And we just haven't done that for one reason or another, and the New York Times is successful because they have a lot of interesting names, but they offer so many different products. I think that's contributed to a lot of it. So I really feel like in the mainstream media space, there's not really a lot of personality journalism except for broadcast news. Fuck Joe Scarborough, but everyone still follows Joe Scarborough and Mika, right? That they're still an institution. Brian Stelter failed because he wasn't a good personality, like,
well, that's
like who wants to hang out with Brian Stelter all day? I think he's a talented guy, but like he's kind of a wet napkin in terms of like personality, right? So he's just gone, So
well, that whole thing. It's the same thing I think with Don Lemon.
Yeah.
In some senses, I feel like a lot of these people at these institutions that are under threat, which is especially mainstream media institutions on cable and all these, are very, very protective of each other and their jobs because it will never get better than that for them.
No,
and I think that they're more aware of that than anyone. It's like, well, of course we know that. And so they definitely know, like, the person at the anchor desk at CNN is never going to get a higher paying or better job than the anchor desk at CNN because they are not additive to the brand is additive to them. And the people that are able to kind of get around that, which I think, you have a bunch of people that once worked at Fox and MSNBC and others, and there are people that are at MSNBC still that I think can do that. But then you have people that are just sad facsimiles of themselves once they leave these institutions. I think of Keith Olbermann specifically as being a really great example of that. But then on the other hand,
train wreck of a man. Yes,
totally. But then on the other hand, and it was so funny. Like I personally, and people, don't like this, but I listen to Tucker Carlson. I don't agree with everything he says and all of that.
Yeah.
I don't agree with all of his viewpoints, but I find him very provocative and I find him very interesting. And so I listen to his podcast or whatever, kind of selectively. He has some weird guests on. I don't need to hear from Cat Turd or something like that. I'm like, I'm good. I'm all good on that one. But like when he has a character of public note, I'll listen to him, and it's interesting. Like he's kind of the other example where, though he was making millions of dollars at Fox, it can be argued that he has never been more culturally relevant, powerful, or richer than he is right now, doing something on his own. And it's hysterical to me when people are like, oh, he's so irrelevant now. I'm like, you are so out of your mind if you think that he has made so much money doing this and is doing like all these crazy speaking tours and going all of these different places and getting crazy interviews with people. And I'm like, it's time now for the people at these institutions that can do things like that to bet on themselves. And I think about Rachel Maddow as probably being like really the only person at MSNBC that can probably do that. And if anything, I feel like she's scarcely seen on that channel anymore. It's almost gotten crazier than she is in some sense, from her modest beginnings. Because she's just like an old school second wave lesbian feminist. She's like, I don't think down with a lot of this craziness. So So it is interesting seeing these institutions fight for themselves so much. That resonated so much with me, because I think that that's just totally true, that these are self-selecting, and then when they get out of the tree, like when they fall out of the tree like a Brian Stelter, it's like, oh man, you're on your own now.
Yeah. You say it's never gonna get better than this. Like I feel that too, man. Honestly, like it probably won't. If I leave the Washington Post, when will it ever get better? If I work at the New York Times, maybe, but I don't know.
Depends on what you
You're right
want with
that-
your life. Because I feel like, and I say this not because I'm your friend, I say this because I really mean it, is like, I think it gets better from here for you, because I think you'll have a lot of options, as a malleable professional that can go in a bunch of different directions,
Exactly.
So I don't worry for you at all, dude.
My intention is to become more like Tucker Carlson, not obviously on his opinions or whatever, but like in terms of business. I do admire him as a business person. I hate almost everything he says, but I think he's an extremely smart person. And to say that he's culturally irrelevant is so wrong. He was fucking sitting right next to Trump and JD Vance at the RNC, He was like the fourth most important person there, probably the third most important.
Yeah, he's like the
person.
Rasputin of that group.
Yeah, exactly. He's a little bit of a kingmaker. So yeah, my intention is to become more of a Tucker Carlson and not a Crystal Liza. And Crystal is a friend of mine, but he hasn't really made anything of himself either. But it's like I would like to transition a lot better, or just work somewhere nicer or somewhere cool. But yeah, it's just, I think that's where it is now. People are drawn to people, they're not going to trust Lawrence O'Donnell, because Lawrence O'Donnell is just sitting there just reading whatever's on the screen, I think people are recognizing that, I love like memes or TikToks or videos, or people are like, why the fuck do people on news talk like this? Like, oh, in the other news, it's like where did that come from? That comes from like old radio days. It's just like 70 years ago, and we're still talking like this. It's insane, honestly.
It is funny, man. Like it's funny even that you bring this up now, because the Olympics are on. So Micah's parents are here, and we were just watching the Olympics last night, and then it rolled into the local news, which I never watch. I hate the local news. And I was just watching, and then I'm like, what is this product? Like, what is this product?
What is that product?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's 2024. What is this?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy. It felt so antiquated.
The people on there, the way they're talking to you, the way they're presenting things,
and what they're talking about. Too.
Like how fast they're moving along topics, like there's no substance,
Right? No substance at all. It's like, oh, there was an accident at this intersection, and there was, the governor said this, and here's the presidential election, polls, and now weather, and sports with, and it's like, oh my,
we're still doing this. It's exactly the same format as in the 1980s, like this. It's the same shit that we grew up with. The cameras are better. Right, the hair is updated. Instead of Connie Chung, it's probably someone else now who's not Asian. But what else has changed though? That's all. That's all that's changed. It's just ridiculous. And so that's what I'm talking about. Like the media is always blaming other external factors, and that was true. But I really do think that it was the stupidity and ego. Like. People are that news station, like we can just keep doing this. It's fine,
And the commercials too that they do where they like show off their teams, and they're like, we're on your side, like those, what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I was watching these,
smiling,
Yeah, right. They all like look at the camera, and I'm like, wow, there's like 7 of these people that work at this thing that just do these reports, and then you see the weather team one, and it's like 5 of them, and I'm like, it's a pretty big head count too. I don't know where this money's coming from. Like watching this, I have no idea what this is all about. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and then so here's one thing about local TV news. If there's one guy that they always like have on there to read the evening news, they're probably paying him $1 million for some reason. For some reason, they have an old guy there, and they are paying him like $1.3 million a year to come into work for maybe like an hour and a half to be like, okay, what am I reading tonight? And then the producer will tell him, and then he'll go into makeup and dress up and put on a suit that he doesn't even fucking own. And he goes into the studio and he reads what's on the screen, and he makes $1 million for that.
It's so weird. It's so dystopian.
Yeah. So you want to talk about like CEO pay, right? and Pete Parsons like spending all this money. It's like, what are local newspapers doing to pay so much money to people who aren't really contributing that much, you know? But they're the face of the station. No one fucking gives a shit, you know? No one fucking gives who the fuck, like, you know, like this old guy is, you know? Why don't you pay him like $150,000 and then spend that money wisely on something else, you know?
Yeah, well said. It is strange. It was just it's so funny you brought that up just because I had just experienced that last night where I was like, oh, it's so interesting. Because I was watching it like earnestly, like, oh, trying to kind of get a frame of mind, being like, maybe I should be more locally oriented, you know, and know like what's going on, you know, in Chesterfield County or something. I'm like, I don't know, man.
But they're not doing anything to convince you. You know, the only reason why I subscribe to the Washington Magazine is because of my own, you know, desire to do that. But if there was no desire, you know, I'm not going to look into it. You know, but what kind of product? I need something more interesting than this.
Right.
You know,
right. Well said.
But that's just what news media, it just hasn't changed, you know. And you know, Game Informer, God bless her, they did try, you know, they did try to, you know, they pivoted back to print. They had the whole little shindig about like, you know, you can just buy our print magazines like over the mail, you know. But you know, a lot of it is too little, too late, you know.
Yeah, I also think it's just the overhead of running legacy businesses or businesses with shareholders and all the rest. That's why. Mm-hmm. Not that I've ever been seriously approached for anyone to like get share, you know, to buy shares or invest in Last Stand, but it's like I would just turn all of that down because that's like the first step towards it becoming unsustainable. Because suddenly now you have someone that has financial expectations and all of the rest, and you need to kind of squeeze growth and really the way we are right now is pretty good. Like we are pretty, I would say, relatively flat. Like right now, things are pretty slow in games. I don't have any expectations that we should be growing by leaps and bounds. Patreon's down a little bit by person, but money's flat. But the beauty is that we're sustainable. So it doesn't matter. Like I'm not looking, I make the same amount of money. I've probably made about that, you know, and I make a good living. I'm not lying about that, but I've pretty much just made the same amount of money every year. And everything else just goes into the business and we grow more and more and we get more and more people to feed. But like an owner that has, you know, or a shareholder would be like, well, I make more and more and more and more. That's how this works, you know? And it's like, but that doesn't have to work like that as long as we don't get out of this frame of mind. And I just try to, I was talking actually my father-in-law about this, where I was just saying, really the secret sauce to the company, I think, is just trying to treat everyone like adults that have other things to do in their lives. Like, to just do the content to the best of your ability on time. And otherwise, just don't worry about anything else. We're not trying to punch a clock. We're not trying to look busy. Like, I just want the content to be great. I want everyone to feel like they're being treated fairly. If there's a problem, I hope people feel like they can approach me about that. And all of the rest. And we go from there. But it's just like, it goes into like treating people like adults. And I'm surprised that that Game Informer couldn't have been a small organization of people that were treated like adults, made a nice amount of money, and put out a good product. And that's simply because it doesn't work like that in the halls of corporate America. It sucks. And that's why it's not that I don't want to become bigger. We couldn't become bigger and make even more money and do all these kinds of things. It's simply to say, why isn't this good enough? You know, like we bring in an investor and then they squeeze us and then we are everywhere. We do more and more and more. It's like, but why? For him? You know, like, I don't know, man.
For the god of growth, right? And I'm really glad that you brought up shareholders and public stocks and everything like that, because I mentioned earlier, Gannett is once the largest newspaper company, and it still might be, you know, in terms of size, right? But Gannett is the owner of USA Today, which is still probably the largest circulation newspaper, only because they cheat. Kind of like, I'm not saying Game Informer cheated, but you know, USA Today is on like every hotel and like every airport and everything like that. It's part of it. Publications do cheat. This is a side, but publications do cheat. There was a weekly magazine in Honolulu that we own called Midweek, and that was the highest circulation paper, even more than our regular central product, which is the newspaper, only because we distributed to everybody who didn't even fucking want that shit, you know? Everybody who had a mailbox, we would send it out, and then we would tell people like, oh my God, it's like 3 million circulation. And it's like there's only 1.5 million people in Hawaii. They're like, no, but there's so many people though. You know, like we can't get rid of these fucking midweek magazines fast enough. But what was I saying? Oh, Gannett owned the Honolulu Advertiser, right? I have a long history with Gannett. Gannett is the first newspaper company to hire me because they also own the Guam paper in Pacific Daily News, which is no longer owned by Gannett, and Gannett left Hawaii too. The reason why is because they had this crazy requirement for every newspaper that they own, from like fucking like Yakima, Washington, to Guam, to USA Today, that the profit margin has to be above 30%. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine running Last Stand Media and telling all of us we didn't hit 30% profit margin? So I guess I'm gonna have to lay off Gene and Ben or whatever.
That's insane.
You know? That's insane. You know, why can't you just be a sustainable news business? Why can't we just like break even? So the Honolulu Advertiser did break even. They finally went into the black. They were in the red for years. They finally went to black 1 year in 2009. And then Gannett sold them off. They were like, okay, great. You know, we stabilized the product enough to be able to sell it off. Finally, we can fucking cut off this fucking like money losing business. But it just became sustainable, and that was so frustrating. And then 600 people lost their job. The whole company just went down. You know?
Yeah, it's awful. You know, and I am of the mind that there are capitalistic realities, obviously, to these decisions. I always see these things about, like with the Game Informer, you see everyone retweeting and all these things being like, you know, the fucking another victim of capitalism and all of that. And I'm like, that's true to a degree, but you also have to understand that there just authentically isn't a growing audience for businesses that are that big with that much overhead. That's why I just think the lean and mean individual businesses like a MinMax, a Last Stand, a Kind of Funny, whatever. This again is probably, like we said, not the future, because I think that's going to be probably even smaller. AI is going to do a bunch of things. I think my communities are going to split even more into bigger and bigger micro communities as people get funneled onto different platforms and so on and so forth. So I don't think we're at the end state yet, but I just think that there's nothing to worry about overhead and growth if you just keep things reasonably small. And I look at some of these institutions, and that's why I asked you about earlier about what, you know, the news, not the Washington Post, but the newspaper that was going to be all remote. I guess that was in Honolulu, you were saying. And if that could work, because that's a huge way to save money. And yet it does seem un-newsroomish to have your journalists not convening together with their editors and having meetings and inviting people over for interviews and having a place to do business. So it's complicated.
I mean, here's the thing, that the office was an oceanfront office. Like, why the fuck do we need to be there? It looks nice. Right. But we didn't even get free parking. Do you know how many fucking parking tickets I got working at that fucking paper? And the company didn't pay for any of it. Every month I was getting charged like $150 from the city and county of Honolulu Police Department because they couldn't afford fucking parking for us. It's fucking ridiculous, you know? Yeah,
that sucks. That kind of stuff always pissed me off when you have to go when you work somewhere, and then this happened at IGN, and you have to when we moved to San Francisco, and you had to pay for room if you wanted to park in the garage underneath the building. And it's like, but you invited us here to work here.
Yeah, you're forcing me to come here.
Right. Know? It's just so strange. I don't know. I don't understand that. Or like going to a doctor's office, and then it's like, oh, you pay $5 an hour. It's like, this is your doctor's office. Like, you do the cost of this, you know, like bake it in, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Anyway.
One aside that you brought up with capitalism, and we mentioned like DEI nonsense or whatever. I wonder if people are able to connect DEI initiatives to capitalism, right? Because, you know, everyone keeps that, you know, these people who make fun of DEI games or whatever like that, like, look at these games with the broader audience, right? But are they really thinking about what broader audience means? You know, broader audience means growth, you know? These companies need to keep growth. So it is a nature of the hyper-capitalist society that a game company be like, we've been catering to white men this whole time, and that's been great and sustainable, but we need more growth. We need 20% profit margins, right? We need investors. We need to make the shareholders happy. So what do? We need to grow the audience. So why don't we just do what I guess Disney does, right? Disney is the most cynical version of this, right? where they're always like, oh, here's the women Marvel movie, or here's like whatever cultures, and here's the Chinese one, whatever, because it's all about chasing that growth. If we didn't
Totally.
live in a hyper capitalist society, then maybe we would just keep having white men as games, and that would just be fine. So I'm wondering if these people are able to connect and make that connection. Like it is a symptom of the business of the nature of business that we're living today.
Yeah, it's well said. It's another version of what I've said about like just during Pride Month having a gay pride flag at your store. It's like a deeply capitalistic signal.
It is,
and it always has been. That's what's so funny about it. So yeah, that's very well said, and I totally agree.
What the fuck is Halo doing selling gay pride like flags or Destiny or whatever like that? It's like, no, we want more gay people to play our game, so we can make more money. That's really what it is,
Dude, the gay pride Wayland Yutani logo is like my favorite thing. Like I love that meme so much.
Is that true?
Yeah, there's like that circulates during gay pride. It'll be like mixed in with real logos that are like have the gay pride flag, and then it'll be that logo, and I'm like, it's so funny, dude. Like
that's exactly what it is, man. And maybe that's what this is a reaction to, but I wish that was a more messaging. Like this is just corporate cynicism. And a lot of that is properly targeted against Disney, but I think people forget that like people are just copying what Disney's doing.
Totally.
That's why Concord is. Everyone keeps talking about. Oh, it's like Marvel dialogue. It's like Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not just copying Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel because Marvel's popular. Because Marvel was able to grow their audience because they have all these fucking other different types of characters, and everyone's like, ooh, I love. I see myself. I'm represented in them. So they're just cynically trying to recreate that, and then it feels stupid and it feels insincere. And then I think that explains why we're in a situation today. That some people are just stupid enough to not get that it's just really the insincerity of this that's pissing them off, and not so much the diversity of it. I don't know. And some people are just racist and sexist. So who knows?
That's true too, dude. I'm going to talk about this more on Sacred proper, but I played Tales of Kenzera Zhao and platinumed it recently, the Surgeon Studios game. Mm-hmm. And the reaction to that game in some corners is just deeply racist. Because I went into that game being like, I bought it when it came out because I love Metroidvanias. And I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. And then I was reading about it, and then people were saying things about it. And I'm like, wow, is this like some sort of like really deeply quote unquote woke sort of game? And I play it, and it's not at all. It's just about black people. Like, why is that? What is wrong with people? This is why I hate the dialogue and the people that kind of the sources of this particular way of talking about games is as if all of these things fall into these very specific buckets.
No,
it's so destructive. So the racism thing, it's funny because I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm like, well, how could you describe this? Now that I've platinumed it, I've seen the game very intimately. This game has been described as this woke DEI game, but it's just a game about black people. There was what is going on?
There was a really, really stupid comment on one of our content where somebody was like, well, why is Gene talking about Kai Cenat all the time? That's so weird, right? And then first of all, because Kai Cenat's the biggest streamer and video game personality in the world, right?
Was that the guy that jumped over the car?
No, that's iShowSpeed.
Oh, iShowSpeed. Okay, so yeah, I'm getting all these people confused. Okay, go ahead.
I can get why, because they have similar personalities too, and they're both about the same age. I can totally get why you might confuse them. Kai Cenat was a guy who started the riot in New York City, and IGN got blasted for saying that first in their story about Kai Cenat being the Elden Ring.
Interesting. This is how disconnected I am, and these people are like doing all this crazy shit, and I'm like, I don't know who any of these people are. It's
because he went to New York to have a PS5 giveaway, and like it was just a complete disaster, and it turned into a riot, right? And then IGN covered Kai Cenat beating Elden Ring, and like he had 300,000 concurrence. Like it was a record breaking Twitch stream, right?
It's crazy.
But in their lead, they said Kai Cenat, the guy who started riots in New York City, blah blah blah, beat Elden Ring, and like every black content creator were like, "Fuck IGN," Like not even like the anti-woke ones, like the woke ones. They're like, fuck IGN. What the fuck are you doing? IGN is racist, right? Well, what's funny is that one of our commenters say, well, Gene only likes Kai Cenat because of woke. And I was like, what exactly do you mean by woke? What is woke about Kai Cenat, who is transphobic? Who doesn't like trans women, who openly says, I think trans women are gross, right? And who is
No, he says that like
yeah,
openly. That's
he just says it openly. He'll be like, ugh, ugh, like that,
interesting.
But he's just a 22-year-old kid, so whatever, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
so interesting that he's comfortable doing that. That's times have changed, I guess.
Exactly, but but like you're calling him woke. So I was like, I replied to the comment. I was like, why is he woke? Tell me exactly why he's woke, and I got no response because he's black.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. But he is so anti. He is so anti woke, and that's why I said, like I was telling you, I'm following people on Kick.com because so many of his friends can't be on Twitch because they are too fucking toxic, So they have to be on Kick.com where they say all kinds of crazy shit there, But then there's nothing woke about it. They're on Kick.com, the most anti-woke streaming site. Kai is the only one that's the most family-friendly, and he's the biggest one. That's why he's on Twitch, There's nothing woke about Kai Cenat. He's just black. So like you people need to really, really realize what you're doing here,
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Because I agree that and that's why it bothers me, because there are so many valid arguments to be made in all these different directions, and people they just get too multi-directional. It's like, you don't need to, not everything is a problem, but it is funny to watch, like what you were saying earlier. I could just never relate to character creation in the sense of like, I'm looking for me in a game. Now, maybe that comes from being just a white male, and I see myself in everything, and you see that from a very early age, and that's just built in. And so I don't see it any other way. And I totally accept that that's probably a major part of it. But I also just don't understand why, like, I want to see just a 6 foot, 200-pound, look like I have a little pregnant belly character in Overwatch or something, or Concord. It's like, no, like I don't. That's why I look at some of these characters in Concord and I'm like, these characters suck, like there's a few cool ones, but overall, these are bad characters. That game is, I don't say that for sake of it, that game seems to be in trouble. I don't know. Maybe they can save it. I have no idea.
Yeah. I like how this conversation became nothing but Game Informer.
I know. Who cares?
It's fun though. I'm just here chatting with my buddy Colin.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so no worries there. But I did want to get back a little bit on the topic of journalism, I guess, is to ask about what about, and we brought up Stephen Totilo, which is an interesting example of it. I don't really know of too many others actually, but people always say, especially on Patreon, and we get letters and people write in or whatever saying like, what about like a written component to what you do? And I'm of the mind that, unfortunately, unlike politics and tech and a few other parts of the written world, games haven't translated well to the written word for some reason. Like, I think enthusiasts overestimate the need for something like that outside of a niche. And I'm wondering if you think that Substack could be like a new viable platform, or a newer viable platform for there to be more essay writers and shit like that. Because people say they want it, but I don't know if there's actually support for that kind of content.
Yeah, I don't know. The gaming audience aren't huge readers, right? I know from myself, especially since I'm the only person writing, that I am serving a niche to the Washington Post, a niche of people who do appreciate like good writing and want to read good writing. And that's what I try to provide all the time, something that's interesting and, good wordplay, and it's something that's entertaining, and you take away something that's thoughtful. But in terms of the written word, I don't know. Substack is tough.
Substack's been interesting to me because of who in my life has become attached to the platform. Like my dad's brother, Uncle Michael, he's like a huge Substack reader. He's like in his 70s. He's an investor, an angel investor in Western Pennsylvania, and he's always like just kicking me Substack stories. And a few other people in my life like will text me stories in their Substack, URL, they're branded or whatever, and I'm like, this is so interesting. It is beginning to permeate like Patreon did for many years, but even Patreon, which is just a word I've been throwing around since 2012 in some sense every day of my life, still most people have no idea what that even is. And so this gets back into the whole like just serving the niche and being willing to just have a small organization of people that are flexible. I think one of the things I love about Last Stand, like I would love to have more of you on with me full time, but the problem is that we don't really have the money to do that much beyond what we do now. And the bigger thing is that there's like no need for the content. Like, I don't know where we go from here. People already complain that there's too much, you know? So I like having this sort of, you know, voluntary association with a bunch of creators that have stayed really loyal to the brand for some people for years, just because like they can do whatever they want outside and we just do this one thing together, whatever the case might be, whatever show it is. I think it works out really well, and it lets everyone be flexible and do their own thing. And that's what I was thinking about with you earlier, Gene, was you were noting about your nerves about the post and where it goes from here or whatever. And I'm like, I see in you a master of a niche, like a streaming Gene Park, a podcasting Gene Park, a flexible, working much less, much looser, maybe less worried Gene Park in the future. Sure. You know, like, that's why I really don't worry about you. I look around the ecosystem of games writers, and I'm not friends with very many of them anymore, but I look around and I'm like, you better hold on for dear life. You know? I don't think that's you. And I'm not saying that because we're friends. I just don't think, I think it's fairly obvious that's
no. I'm glad you see that. And that's intentional. You know, I do want to build a foundation because look, I've been laid off before too. I got laid off in 2009. What saved me was my malleability, the fact that I could easily transition into a health insurance company and help them start up an email customer service form, which is what I did for the Blue Shield in Hawaii, where I was like, they were like, we don't have anyone to have we have no customer facing operation on the website. And I was like, well, like, I'll start it, you know, and that's what I did, because I was into social media. I'm into engagement. I'm into interacting with the readers, right? Or with the customer base. That was always my expertise, and that's been my expertise when I was a social media editor at the Washington Post. And I think that's why the Washington Post likes to keep me around, is because, you know, they know that you can slide me into any position in the Post, whether it was podcasting or editing or graphic design or even video production, and I'll probably do pretty well, you know. And that's all by design. Again, I'm making myself the everyman of media. You know, I want it to be like Howard Stern. I want it to be the master of media. You know, maybe I'm not that so much anymore. You know, I'm not really on TikTok. But part of it is like being here on Last Stand Media. You know, I'm very grateful for you to getting me introduced to the podcasting world. I'm still getting my legs wet. You know, the audience always complains about my little verbal tics and everything like that. And it's like, hey guys, I'm still learning. I'm still learning. And they also get on your case and Chris for saying the same shit. It's like, is this the first time you guys ever listen to like people like normally? Because people will say the same shit over and over again. Totally. You know, like,
I'm very sympathetic. I'm very sympathetic to that shit, because I know what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they'll make fun of you and Chris for saying the same shit all the time. And they're already making fun of Brad for saying, you know, all that good stuff. And it's like, I like it when Brad says all that good stuff. It's cool. You know, I know, because that's when I know that it's fucking Brad talking, you know?
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm extremely sensitive to that. That's why I have no problems really with anyone doing their jobs. But I know what it's like to have one of those like upvoted, like, look how fucking Colin's an asshole kind of comment. And I'm just like, whatever, man. You know? Yeah. Like, I podcast with all of you, and I know you're all good at it. So people are such assholes, man. They have no patience.
You know, I mean, what was frustrating is that, like, you know, Taylor Lorenz last year got all this attention for starting a podcast with Vox Media, right? And then first of all, I was like, why the fuck can't we get her a podcast? We have our own podcast team. And also, like, I've been doing what Taylor Lorenz has been doing this whole time with Last Stand Media, you know? Like other media organizations, oh my God, she's doing video podcasts. Podcasts on video? Is this the future? Is this the future? You know?
You have to understand. Yeah.
And so that is like the fucking like simple-minded mentality that's like in the media, where like one person would do something like that's slightly left field, like, oh my God, that's so innovative and creative. And it's like, I just been doing this whole time, you know?
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I grew my audience is because, like, I would go on podcasts like this, you know, like, people got mad at me for going on a podcast, but, you know, I've only grown my audience since then, right? It was part of my strategy to go on your podcast and talk to you and to expose myself to your audience, which everybody fucking knows who I am now, right? But it was the same strategy I did with my buddies Pat and Wooly when they got me on the podcast in Castle Super Beast. I was like, this is perfect. These are my people, you know. their audience is my people, so they need to know who I am. So ever since I did that, that's when I started to really, really grow exponentially in terms of the gaming space, you know. And it wasn't through channels like IGN, it wasn't through channels like GameSpot, you know, it wasn't through Reset Era, you know.
Right.
It was through podcasts. It was through creators. And the great thing is that, like, and a lot of people recognize this, and I think you recognize this too, is that I am very friendly with creators. You know, I do not have an antagonistic relationship with them at all. I think we should be working with them.
Mhm.
I wish I could be more collaborative with them, because, as you say, creators are the now. You know, so we should at least play in that space. You know.
There's a deep
But
jealousy, I think, with a lot of traditional games coverage
yes.
people against, and a mysticism about why it's not working or why it works maybe so well for other people. And I'm not even talking about us. I'm talking about the people you're talking about, you know, like, and the people on Twitch and Kick and all these people, just hundreds of thousands of people watching their content.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to hide your bitterness better, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, and like you said, embrace it and see what it can do for you. And find
Yeah.
people from that space. That's why it links back to the Philip Musing conversation in such an interesting way, because there's no doubt that IGN was scared away from doing just that because they had this really bad experience, and that sucks. It's a very consequential thing that happened in that sense, because they finally opened up and realized what we had been telling them for years, which is like, why don't you go get some of these people? And they did, and they just picked the wrong one, you know.
They pick one of the worst possible ones.
Yeah, like the one with that lacked the integrity to do the job, but had all the other tools, and that was why it was so easy to trick them. You know, I
do
get
think
that.
that it's HR. I do think part of it is HR problem. You know, you need to hire the right people. You need to have the right instincts to understand which people have integrity, which people have the personality, which people have the working drive and the work ethic to continue to do this. But you're right. Like, even when Game Informer shut down, right? I saw so many tweets from people saying, like, well, it looks like we're just going to cede the space to influencers who are just so toxic and spreading misinformation. And it's like, I get that, but it's like you said, like, you need to hire your bitterness better, but also you need to be like, I prefer not to be bitter and blame external factors and wonder, okay, well, what are you doing that's so interesting? You know, what are they doing that's captivating people? And it's why, like, people, it's why I follow people like Jack Posobiec or Mike Cernovich on Twitter, right? And it's why I interact with them, and the reason why they follow me. But the reason why I follow them is because I find what they do very interesting. You know, like Tucker Carlson again. You know, I may disagree with completely 100% of what they do or what they're saying, but what they're doing is interesting. Though, how are they reaching these people? You know, we should be able to let go of our ego and learn from people who are successful. Learn from Joe Rogan. You know.
Yeah, oh yeah, the Joe Rogan stuff is so funny to me. Is he just commands this massive audience, and there's just such seething jealousy about it. And I think I think it's amazing, and like, it shows that it's possible for anyone. He has all the tools that are necessary, the charisma, the knowledge. He's very quick, you know, all those kinds of things, and that comes from being a stand-up comic and all that. His wit. But you look at that, and I look at stuff like that. It's like with the election being like a kind of a coin flip, right? It's like, that's kind of interesting considering how overwhelmingly the powers that be drag everything in one direction and have one voice. And yet it's so obvious that there's a huge pushback just by virtue of the support of the other option. It means it's not breaking through, and you'd want to look at, like you said, why that is in the places where the power is starting to grow. I think it's a fascinating time to be in this space. That's why I love it doesn't quite remind me of it, but it's kind of like the pamphlet era of like the Enlightenment, where like people were just writing things and then the little presses going, and they were just sending them around, and think people were reading this shit, you know, Thomas Paine and all that. And it's like, you could just kind of find an audience if you were just good enough. It was just enough for you to be you, for you to do you. You're not really reliant on mercantilism then, or capitalism or whatever, outside of just the niche that is going to choose to support you. It's that's why I love the term. That's why I love the name Patreon, because it's a reference to Renaissance patronage. And that's good shit. People that want the arts, that want entertainment, that want whatever this is, you know. And I think that's why I'm so anti-corporate, because I feel like capitalism is beautiful. It didn't, mercantilism and like kind of the transfer to capitalism adapted around these state-run corporations, and it understood mega corporations, but capitalism is supposed to spread the field. And I feel like the concentration of power and money is deeply uncapitalistic at some level.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I want to see these power structures broken up, and why I'm always pulling for like the little people at the bottom, and want to make it, and want to help normalize, like in my little corner, normalize like paying a little bit of money towards the creators that you really love if you like their content enough and you want to keep it going, seeing it as a valuable service or whatever. And if you can't do that at the newspapers or at CNN or whatever, then you're just fundamentally, at these various outlets, Huffington Post, like you're failing, in some sense. The thing about the Washington Post and its games coverage, though, is it's so strange how you haven't been centered more. Like, don't they realize how big games are and like how powerful it is? Like, even politicians don't get it yet. If I was fucking Kamala Harris, I'd be on Twitch like every day, doing something.
Yeah,
it's crazy to me. Like, no one gets it. If I were in this newsroom environment, I would be centering our games coverage in a major way, and have way more people doing it than just one person, which was, of course, your reality at one time.
Especially in our recent Constellation episodes about politics, people were wondering why I seem so anti-liberal or why I was so critical of Democrats. The reason why is because, one, I live in Washington, D.C., and it's like 95% Democrats, right? But two, I understand that the same mentality that was sinking the Democrat Party is sinking the mainstream media. It's the same ego where like the Democrats feel like, well, Twitch is not for us. This is not a platform. We're above Twitch, right?
Yeah,
Twitch is beneath us.
Yeah,
that's how they feel, right? So there's so many points you just talked about. Let me go back to what you said about Enlightenment era and the pamphlets, right? I'm so glad that you said that, because that's exactly what I've been thinking too. I really do think that it's kind of like horseshoeing around to that era again, and it goes to how media organizations are now becoming more left-leaning, or more openly left-leaning and right-leaning, right? And I mentioned this before too. The idea of objectivity in journalism didn't come from some principle saying we have to be fair and we have to be honest and we have to be truthful. That came as an excuse that we built later on. The reason why objectivity came is because companies back then in the late 1800s were getting pissed off in newspapers saying you're being too political. We disagree with you about this stuff, so we will not advertise with your pamphlet anymore. And they were like, "Oh fuck, we need to shut the fuck up so we can make more money." The objectivity in journalism came again from that root cause of trying to grow a business in a capitalist environment. But right now, I think a lot of people are realizing maybe that's not working anymore.
Right.
And maybe we need to push you around. And
it's very
that's
well
why
said.
It is kind of getting back to like, okay, these are individual people that are distributing to a couple people, my community of people, right?
That's very well said. It's like what you're describing is like corporatism brought order for sake of corporatism that has since broken down. And I think that's why things feel so revolutionary and unstable right now.
Yeah,
is because there is more chatter, there is more unrest, there is more, like small movements and like small things mattering. The rise of like even international terror and all this kind of crazy shit where it's like, damn, dude, Hamas is a great example, or like whatever institution around the world you want to point at. ISIS back in the day, it's like this is just this random group, that like has a belief system and somehow carved out all this land and all this kind of crazy shit. It's, that's an interesting thesis. Very well said. Yeah.
You're right. I feel like we're in a period of revolution right now, and that's why things are kind of fucky, But we just didn't see it coming. In terms of why the Washington Post won't center me, again, I think it's just because they, I probably shouldn't say. Here's what I'll say. When you see me on CBS Evening News or like Good Morning America and doing those national news hit pieces, it's because of me. I'm the one making those outreaches, and I'm the one making those connections.
So like, yeah, not, in other words, internal PR kind of fielding that, or
it's
doing
not
that
an organization led thing. The organization does support a lot of our reporters, and they're always on MSNBC or CNN for stuff. But I have to again. I'm the one creating my own reality here. And I like that. I like, again, being the master of my own media. But, I could use some support too. Imagine what I could be with institutional support.
Yeah, I agree.
But
and just the central, it just seems like a growth opportunity for the Post, considering you were talking about the New York Times earlier, and they're obviously doing very well, but I think a lot of that was through expansion and like buying the Athletic, being really smart with things like Wordle and making like a subscription model that just includes and incorporates that. They've been more aggressive. The Washington Post has to be like the more clever small market baseball team that needs to deploy its talent in very specific ways. And you would just think that they would see they would be like, wow, man, like what is Fortnite? Why aren't we writing much more about Minecraft and all these kinds of things and incorporating Roblox and all of that, wasn't there like a crazy story about Roblox and
in Wired magazine about pedophiles?
Yeah,
right?
like really crazy fucking deep reporting that requires time, money, and effort. And you would think an institution like the Post would see that. That's the level of story you can tell in the space.
Well, the good thing is that I have been. The good thing though is that I have been working on a really, really big piece. This is actually the first time I'm public talking about it. But I've been working on a really, really big piece for some months now. So the Washington Post has been supportive in terms of me doing some bigger piece that I think is really important. So keep an eye out for that. I was actually busy all weekend during my birthday. As I left the convention after the Final Fantasy 16 panels, I was back in the newsroom and I was working until 10 p.m.
Awesome. So, that's exciting. Yeah, and I'd like to see more centered game content just because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Washington Post audience wouldn't resonate with them at all. But I feel like that's so antiquated to feel that way at this point. Just it just feels like a lot of it's front page news in some sense, if not on the main paper, like, the business section and the arts and all of that, treating it as a legitimate form of art. But maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe people don't want that.
Look, it's just tough. Like, because these people, look, I'm just gonna say it, these people are out of touch. When I pitched a piece on Hideo Kojima, and I said the headline should just say Kojima, and they said, "Well, who's Hideo Kojima?" And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And I lifted up papers of like other like names of like other people. I was like all of these people are like 11 times, 15 times less popular than Hideo Kojima. Get your head out of your ass,
Right.
That's what I want to say. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I feel like
so it's a struggle, but I'm in here because I want to make it work, because I'm carving that out for myself, and Jason Schreier is too over at Bloomberg,
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's really the seminal coverage guy right now, as far as just news breaks and stuff like that. He's obviously not doing criticism or deep dive interviews or essays, a lot of stuff off the record, or, or on background and all that stuff. I want to say off the record, but it's different. Like,
yeah. He does the kind of journalism I don't want to do. I don't want to do that. I specifically avoid doing stuff like that. I do not want to do reports like that. I like cultural stuff.
Yeah, me neither. I broke a lot of news, and I still break a little bit here and there, but it always comes to me. I don't go and seek it out. That's a stressful life. That's too reliant on sources telling you things. And I feel like that could all erode in 2 seconds, like if people just cut you off. So it's better to make a name for yourself from your own criticism. Like, the reality is that Jason's very talented and knows a lot about games and the way they're made and all the people that make them, but no one really cares what he thinks about individual games. And that's a choice. And he's done very well.
But the nice thing is that people actually do care about like what I care about games.
Right,
people subscribe just to read my fucking Stellar Blade review. Stellar Blade. No one gives a shit about Stellar Blade, but they're like, "Oh, this is a new game," and I'm wondering what Gene thinks about it.
It's awesome. Yeah,
it's great.
Well, I've had you for 2 hours. I don't want to keep you for much longer, Gene, but this was a fun conversation about Game Informer ostensibly and games journalism media. I mean, you and I always have interesting talks about this, in my opinion. I don't know if people enjoy them. I think they do. But I love talking to you about it because you have this more hard news background, and it's the fusion, like the synthesis of our worlds, really, and is where you kind of stand now. So it's cool, and it's good to get your insight and input on it. We're obviously rooting for you in the coverage over at the Post, because I want games to be treated like more seriously. And I've always said it just requires people to care on one end, but it also requires people willing to do that difficult work. And there's just not that many people that are willing to do the difficult work. And I don't blame them, because maybe people aren't paying for it. You can't do shit for free and all that kind of stuff. But I'm so excited to know that you're working on something deep, and we'll keep an eye out for that. So
yeah, that's what Kitase-san said too during our dinner, where like I was talking about game design, and I was like comparing like Secret of Mana or Seiken Densetsu to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, right? And they're like, wow, you really think so much about games. Like you really, really think deeply about it. Like it's remarkable that someone who knows and thinks this deeply about games, like to the point where you're teaching us stuff, is working at a place like the Washington Post. So
Yeah, it's
that meant a
awesome.
lot to me, and it's the entire reason why I haven't left, because that is a remarkable thing, you know. So like I don't want to say that it's never been better, but like it's never going to be like this again, you know. That's for sure.
Right, right.
And so you know, I've been in this for 9 years, and it's still something that's, you know, and like the last 4 years, and obviously 2 years when I was sick or whatever, you know, I'm just trying to make up for time and all that. But yeah, this was a fun conversation. You reached out to our whole friendship started because you found my career fascinating. The fact that I didn't come from the games industry or whatever.
Right.
Go back to listen to that old conversation that everyone got mad at. I can't watch it because when I talked to you, I was actually super sick, and so like I visibly look sick, so it's hard for me
I
to
understand.
watch.
I totally understand that.
But you know, it's still a good listen, and it really was like the genesis of like why you were fascinated with me, because I don't, like you said, I don't come from this world. You know, I don't come from games industry. I don't have like this romantic like allure of a games newsroom or whatever like that. I'm just kind of detached from it. You know, but I still love games journalism, and it's so interesting to me. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, yeah, I reached out because I like, you know, I liked the cut of your jib. It's similar to how I found Chris, really, where I just liked Chris. You know, I
Mhm.
followed him on Twitter, was familiar with him a little bit, and then I was just like, you know, I like you. We should talk. You know, and good things grow out of that. You know, I wish I had more opportunities to talk to more people in the sphere, but I just don't. You know, I'm not invited to really any shows or anything like that. Which I can't force anyone to do that. And I don't blame them if
Mhm.
it's going to cause them issues.
Mhm.
But so I have to go and seek out the interesting people that I want to talk to and hope that they're willing to come and talk to me. And sometimes it grows much deeper, like it has here. So I'm glad that I reached a hand out. We probably would have found each other eventually anyway. We're too
Probably,
similar.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think part of it, you know, people are like, well, why does Gene always like agree with Colin about politics? I think part of it is because our politics are not too different, quite to be quite honest. You know, everyone calls me liberal, and like I said on the Discord, I was like, I've never said I'm a liberal. I will never publicly claim that. So the fact that you assume that, just all in your head, you know,
Right.
just all that's just whatever arguments that you think Colin and I are having, you know. But really, Colin reached out to me because he probably thought I was interesting politically, and the reason why I agreed to talk about it was because I was like, "Oh, there's nothing disagreeable with what this guy says, other than, you know, obviously the smaller finer points." But you know, I can talk to this guy, no problem. It's cool. You
Yeah,
know?
man. I'm glad that it all worked out for us. And
Yeah.
we'll convene again soon. We'll have another conversation. I'm sure, sadly, I don't think this is going to be the end of the erosion of some of these game space sites. And
Mm.
some of them I'm just so curious about. Like Kotaku is really the big one where I'm like, I don't quite understand this business.
Hmm.
I don't understand how you're making money. It doesn't seem to make any sense. I do wonder what's going to happen with them. Polygon seems the same, but I don't understand. I don't pretend to know what's going on with them either. So
I mean, Vox has been going through it too. I mean, that's the thing though. Like you mentioned Huffington Post, but what did the Huffington Post now? Is barely anything,
yeah,
right? Vox Media was huge too.
right.
So I mean, that's one thing I wonder about, like, you know, the YouTube like video strategy thing. It's like Vox did put all their shit on YouTube, right? And Vox did have like an amazing like video production, but then still they're totally tanking now.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
wondering what happened.
it
Was
wasn't
it bad
enough.
leadership? Was it bad decisions? You know, like Vice. I think I think I know where Vice came from. It's probably similar to Pete Parsons, just mismanagement and just people not like allocating the money in the right way. But Vox, I was wondering about. You know, like Ezra Klein left it. You know,
Right. No,
and just
totally. Who was
and he found that
intrinsically
shit.
linked to
You
it,
know?
obviously. And
Yeah.
I'm of the mind that a lot of it had broken down. It might not be totally true, but it feels like a lot of it broke down because things became so partisan and no one real like it just kind of veered inevitably. Everything veered in one direction or the other,
Mhm.
mostly in one direction. And I just think that there was no willingness to just tell stories that, like, it's a bummer when you watch Vice, you know, late Vice, which does a lot of really great stuff, but knows that they are deeply partisan. And if they knew
Mhm.
I was watching them, we don't even want you as an audience member. It's like, so like, why
Mhm.
can't people just make content and be normal, talk like
Mhm.
normal people, have people of different opinions,
Mhm.
and it's not so serious and it doesn't have to be so vile out there. But I don't know, man. It's I think the erosion is going to continue, and
Mhm.
I'll be very interested to see how it all pans out. But we'll convene at that time. But people can find you still on. You'll be on Constellation soon, I think, in the coming weeks, or I don't know. I have to look at the schedule.
Who knows?
And then punching up, of course,
with Brad probably, unless something really goes wrong with Dustin for some reason. So
great, yeah. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and you'll be banging around these different shows, so people can find you there. Obviously, find you on Twitter. Obviously, find you at the Post. Be well. Appreciate you, and thank you for being here.
This was a fun conversation. I'm glad this was a good idea. I'm glad that we got a lot out of it too. I think.
Yeah.
So I hope you all did too. So
likewise, and we appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support of all things Last Stand Media on Patreon. Patreon.com/LastStandMedia. LastStandMedia.store for merch. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Thank you for keeping us sustainable.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.